My wife told her mother, "I'm divorcing him. I can't live on his pathetic salary." I agreed to all her terms. A month later, her lawyer called her, his voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell me about this? Look, I need you to understand something right off the bat. I wasn't lurking around corners like some creepy husband in a Lifetime movie waiting to catch my wife doing something scandalous. I wasn't pressed up against the wall with a glass to my ear, and I definitely wasn't hiding behind curtains like a discount private investigator who couldn't afford actual surveillance equipment. No, I was doing what I do best, fixing stuff that nobody else in this house seemed to notice was broken. That annoying squeak on the kitchen door had been driving me absolutely insane for 2 weeks straight. The kind of sound that drills into your skull at 3 in the morning when you're trying to grab water, and suddenly the whole house knows about it, because that hinge decided to scream like a dying pterodactyl. So there I was, Thursday evening, toolbox in hand, WD-40 at the ready, doing the Lord's work on a door hinge that clearly hadn't seen maintenance since the Clinton administration. I had my screwdriver wedged into the top hinge, carefully working the pin loose while mentally calculating whether I needed to replace the whole thing or just lubricate it, when I heard my wife Sabrina's voice float through from the kitchen with that particular tone she uses when she's had exactly 2.5 glasses of Chardonnay and feels like the whole world owes her a Netflix special. You know that voice, the one that's just a little too loud, a little too confident, the kind that makes you wonder if she forgot other people have ears. And then, like a grenade rolling across a tile floor, she dropped it. "I'm divorcing him, Mom. I seriously can't live on his pathetic salary anymore. I'm done pretending I'm okay with this mediocre life." I froze. Not in the dramatic movie way where everything goes slow motion and sad piano music starts playing. More like the way you freeze when you accidentally step on a Lego in the dark and your brain needs a second to process the audacity of the pain. My hand was still on the screwdriver. My body was still crouched by that door, but my entire mental operating system just blue-screened and needed to reboot. Did she really just say that? About me? About my salary? The same salary that paid for the kitchen renovation she's currently standing in, sipping wine that I bought, talking to her mother on the phone plan that's under my name? Her mother, Lorraine, and oh boy, we need to talk about Lorraine, responded with the enthusiasm of a villain who just found out the hero's weakness. "Good for you, sweetheart. You've been too patient with him. Get everything you can in the divorce. That man is too soft to fight back anyway. He'll probably just roll over and let you have it all." She said this like she was giving investment advice, like destroying someone's life was just a smart financial strategy you discuss over brunch. Too soft? Too soft? This woman who I rescued from a leaking roof during an actual thunderstorm 3 years ago while she sat inside praying over scented candles like divine intervention was going to patch her shingles, was calling me soft? I was up there in the rain, slipping on wet tiles, risking my life while she burned something called Divine Protection Lavender Sage and asked Jesus to cover her home. Lady, Jesus sent me with a ladder and a tarp, and you're calling me soft? But here's the thing that really got me. The detail that made this whole situation shift from devastating to absolutely hilarious. They had no idea I could hear them. See, about 6 months ago, Sabrina wanted to open up the kitchen, which in home renovation terms means knocking down walls and pretending it makes your house look like something from HGTV instead of just making it echoey and weird. I spent 3 weekends demolishing that wall between the kitchen and the dining room, dealing with dust, permits, and her constantly changing her mind about where she wanted the opening. I rebuilt that wall. I textured it. I painted it. I made it look like it had been there since the house was built. And in the process of doing that, I learned something very valuable. Sound travels through that opening like it's got a direct highway into the dining room. Every word spoken in that kitchen might as well be broadcast on stadium speakers, but nobody thinks about acoustics when they're too busy picking out cabinet hardware. So there I was, crouched by a door with a screwdriver in my hand, listening to my wife and her mother plot my financial destruction with the casualness of people discussing what to order for dinner. Sabrina laughed, actually laughed, and said, "He won't even see it coming. He's so busy being the nice guy and fixing things that he doesn't pay attention to what actually matters. I've already talked to a lawyer, Mom. We're going to take him for everything." The way she said nice guy made it sound like a terminal disease, like being decent was somehow the stupidest thing a person could be. Lorraine cackled, and I mean actually cackled like she was stirring a cauldron, and replied, "That's my girl. You deserve a real life, not this starter marriage nonsense. Get the house, get alimony, and find yourself a real man with a real career." A real career. I'm a mechanical engineer. I design systems that keep buildings from collapsing and machines from exploding, but apparently that's not real enough because I don't wear a suit to work and my office doesn't have a view of the city skyline. I fix problems, I build things, I make sure stuff works. But in Sabrina's new worldview, influenced heavily by her friends who married investment bankers and guys who describe themselves as entrepreneurs, even though they just sell supplements on Instagram, I'm basically a caveman with a wrench. I should have burst through that kitchen door right then and there, toolbox in hand, ready to confront them with the righteous fury of a man who just discovered his wife thinks he's a walking ATM with a disappointing balance. I should have demanded answers, asked her how long she'd been planning this, made her look me in the eye while she explained how the man who literally built half of this house wasn't good enough for her anymore. But I didn't. You know why? Because I'm not soft, I'm strategic. There's a difference, and Lorraine's about to learn it the hard way. Instead, I quietly finished fixing that hinge, packed up my toolbox with the calm precision of a surgeon closing up after a successful operation, and walked out of that dining room without making a single sound. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of our bed. Well, I guess it was about to become just the bed, and I didn't scream, didn't punch walls, didn't do any of that dramatic stuff that feels good in the moment but solves exactly nothing. No, I did something much more dangerous. I started thinking. I started remembering every document I'd ever signed, every asset we owned, every legal structure I'd put in place over the years, because I'm the kind of guy who actually reads the fine print and plans ahead. You know, the boring stuff that soft guys do while their wives are busy not appreciating them. See, Sabrina thinks I'm too polite to fight, too passive to make waves, too nice to protect myself. She's about to discover that quiet doesn't mean weak. It just means I'm the kind of person who plans the whole chess game, while everyone else is still arguing about which piece is the horse. I heard every single word they said, every dismissive laugh, every cruel joke about my pathetic life, and I absorbed it all like a sponge. Not because it hurt me, though let's be real, it absolutely did, but because information is power, and they just handed me enough ammunition to win a war they didn't even know they'd started. I didn't sleep much that night. Sabrina came to bed around midnight, smelling like wine and betrayal, and kissed me on the forehead like she'd just spent the evening watching Netflix instead of planning my financial execution. She whispered, "Good night," with the kind of fake sweetness that would make artificial sugar jealous, and I said it back, because I'm polite like that. Soft, even. And while she fell asleep next to me, probably dreaming about her new life funded by my pathetic salary, I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, mentally organizing every piece of evidence I'd need, every legal maneuver I could make, every single way I could turn this disaster into the most educational experience of her life. Tomorrow, I'd start building my case. Tonight, I just smiled in the dark and thought about how satisfying it's going to be when the woman who called me too soft to fight realizes she just picked a fight with the wrong engineer. Because soft men don't plot, we plan. And baby, I've got blueprints. Here's the thing that really gets me. The part that keeps me up at night staring at the ceiling like I'm trying to find answers in the texture patterns. We weren't always like this. I know that sounds like something every divorced guy says right before he starts crying into his beer at a depressing bar, but I'm serious. There was actually a time, not even that long ago, when Sabrina looked at me like I was the answer to every question she'd ever had about what she wanted in life. She used to call me my rock, and she didn't say it ironically or as some kind of joke she shared with her friends later. She meant it. She'd introduce me to people at parties and say, "This is my husband, he's my rock," with this proud smile like she'd won some kind of lottery by landing a guy who showed up when he said he would and actually knew how to fix things without calling a professional. Now, apparently, I've been downgraded from rock to pebble, specifically, the annoying kind that gets stuck in your shoe during a hike and ruins your whole day. The transformation didn't happen overnight like some dramatic movie reveal where the music gets ominous and you suddenly realize your partner is actually evil. No, this was more like watching a plant die slowly because you forgot to water it, except in this case, I was the one doing all the watering, and the plant just decided it wanted to be in a fancier pot in someone else's house. Metaphors aside, let me paint you a picture of what we used to be back when I was still worth loving and my toolbox was considered charming instead of embarrassing. 3 years ago, back when we'd only been married for about a year and everything still had that new relationship smell, Sabrina used to iron my shirts every Sunday evening while humming Ed Sheeran songs. I'm talking the whole domestic fantasy. She'd set up the ironing board in the living room, put on one of those sappy playlists, and actually iron my work shirts with this little smile on her face like she was doing something meaningful. I'd watch her from the couch, usually pretending to read something but really just observing this woman who seemed genuinely happy to be doing something nice for me. And I'd think, man, I really lucked out. She'd fold each shirt perfectly, hang them in my closet organized by color, and sometimes she'd spray them with this cologne she bought me because she said it made me smell like success and sandalwood, which I'm pretty sure was just marketing copy from the bottle, but I appreciated the sentiment. She used to say she loved my simple mechanical engineer energy, which at the time I thought was a compliment. She'd brag to her friends about how I could fix anything, how I understood how stuff worked, how I was the kind of guy who read instruction manuals for fun and actually enjoyed organizing the garage. Her friend Melissa once had a kitchen disaster, something with her garbage disposal that was making sounds like it was summoning demons, and Sabrina volunteered my services with this proud enthusiasm, like she was lending out a celebrity. I spent 2 hours at Melissa's house fixing her plumbing, while Sabrina stood there telling everyone who'd listened that her husband was so handy and smart, and I felt like a superhero in cargo pants. Those were good days. Simple days. Days when being competent and reliable were apparently attractive qualities instead of whatever they are now. But then something shifted, and I can pinpoint almost exactly when it happened. Her friend group started changing, or maybe they didn't change, and I just started noticing what they'd always been. Melissa married some hotshot corporate lawyer who wore those expensive suits that look uncomfortable but cost more than my car payment. Her other friend, Ashley, landed a guy who claimed to be a tech entrepreneur, which as far as I could tell meant he had money from somewhere, but nobody could really explain what he actually did all day besides post motivational quotes on LinkedIn. Then there was Vanessa, who married a doctor, specifically a dermatologist who drove a Tesla and had strong opinions about wine regions. Suddenly, every girl's night out turned into a competition about whose husband was more successful, whose house was bigger, whose vacation photos made other people feel worse about their lives. And just like that, my toolbox went from sexy to sad. The same skills that used to make Sabrina proud started making her embarrassed. She stopped telling people what I did for work unless directly asked, and even then she'd say it quickly like she was trying to get through an unpleasant obligation. He's an engineer, she'd say, with the same enthusiasm most people use to describe their dental cleaning appointments. No more details, no more bragging about the projects I worked on, no more proud wife energy. Meanwhile, Ashley would go on for 20 minutes about her husband's latest business venture that sounded suspiciously like a pyramid scheme, and everyone would nod along like he was Elon Musk. I tried, though. God, I really tried to keep up with this new version of what Sabrina wanted from life. I bought her flowers, the nice ones from the actual florist, not the gas station bouquets, because I'm not a complete idiot. I'd come home with roses or lilies or whatever the florist lady recommended that week, and Sabrina would smile and say thank you. But it was the kind of smile you give when someone gives you a gift card to a restaurant you don't really like. Polite, but hollow. What she actually wanted was a Range Rover. Not a practical car, not something with good gas mileage, but specifically a Range Rover because apparently that's what Vanessa drove, and now it was the minimum acceptable vehicle for someone who took themselves seriously. Her friends started taking these elaborate yacht trips. Well, I say yacht trips, but I'm pretty sure at least 2 of them were just large boats that got called yachts for Instagram purposes. They'd post pictures in matching white outfits drinking champagne on the deck, tagging each other with captions like blessed and living our best lives. And Sabrina would scroll through these photos with the kind of longing usually reserved for people looking at pictures of puppies or pizza. Then she'd look at me, sitting on our perfectly nice couch in our perfectly nice house, and I could see the disappointment radiating off her like heat from asphalt in July. I try to lighten the mood, suggest we take a weekend trip somewhere fun, Maybe drive up the coast or visit that bed and breakfast she'd mentioned months ago, but it wasn't the same. I wasn't offering helicopter rides to private islands, so why even bother? The breaking point for me, the moment when I realized we'd crossed some invisible line we couldn't walk back from, was when I got genuinely excited about finding cheap gas. I know how that sounds. I know it makes me sound like the most boring person alive, like someone whose personality got replaced with a spreadsheet. But hear me out. I've been tracking gas prices on this app, and I found a station that was 30 cents cheaper per gallon than everywhere else. 30 cents. Do you know how much money that saves over time? So I came home, actually excited to share this news, and I told Sabrina about it like I'd discovered buried treasure. I might have even done a little celebratory gesture with my hands, which in retrospect was a mistake. She looked at me like I'd just told her I enjoyed watching paint dry as a hobby. Just stared at me with this expression that somehow conveyed both pity and disgust, which is impressive when you think about it. That's a complex emotional range to hit simultaneously. Then she said, and I quote, "That's great, honey," in the same tone you'd use to encourage a child who just showed you a really ugly drawing they made at school. Ashley had just told her about a last-minute trip to Bali that her husband surprised her with, and I was over here throwing a parade because I'd found affordable fuel. The contrast wasn't lost on either of us. I should have seen it coming. All the signs were there, glowing like neon in the dark, but I kept telling myself we were just going through a phase. Couples go through phases, right? That's what all the articles and advice columns say. You hit rough patches, you work through them, you come out stronger on the other side with a renewed appreciation for each other, and maybe some couples therapy techniques you learned from a book with a calming cover. I thought if I just kept being myself, reliable, steady, present, she'd remember why she married me in the first place. I thought the whole my rock thing was still valid, that she still valued stability and dependability and someone who actually showed up every single day. But I'd become background noise in my own marriage, the human equivalent of elevator music. I was there, technically making sounds, but nobody was really listening. She'd scroll through her phone during dinner, barely responding when I talked about my day. She stopped asking about my projects at work, stopped pretending to care about the technical challenges I was solving. Her eyes would glaze over the moment I started explaining anything, and I'd catch myself mid-sentence wondering why I was even bothering to finish the story. The irony is that my pathetic salary that she complained about to her mother was paying for everything she wanted. The house renovations she kept demanding? My salary. The new furniture she ordered because the old stuff wasn't sophisticated enough? My salary. The wine she drank while plotting my downfall. You guessed it, funded by the same paycheck she found so disappointing. But none of that mattered because her friends' husbands made more, had more, posted more, and therefore were worth more as human beings according to whatever twisted metric she was using to measure value. I smiled through all of it because therapy costs money and sarcasm is free. Every dismissive comment, every eye roll when I suggested something that didn't cost a fortune, every time she compared me unfavorably to someone else's husband. I absorbed it with the patience of a saint or maybe just the delusion of someone who still thought love could survive being treated like a consolation prize. I made jokes, kept things light, pretended I didn't notice that the woman who used to iron my shirts now looked at me like I was an obstacle between her and the life she actually wanted. So yeah, we weren't always like this. We used to be good, or at least I thought we were good, which might be the saddest part of all this. Somewhere between my rock and my regret, I became the villain in a story I didn't even know I was part of, and the only crime I committed was staying exactly the same person she'd married while she decided that person wasn't enough anymore. You know that feeling when you're looking for something completely innocent, like a stapler or a phone charger, and you accidentally stumble across something that fundamentally changes your entire understanding of reality? That's basically what happened to me on a Thursday night that started out boring and ended with me questioning whether I actually knew the person I'd been sleeping next to for the past 4 years. I wasn't snooping, wasn't going through her stuff like some paranoid husband who watches too many true crime documentaries. I was literally just trying to print out a receipt for my taxes because apparently the IRS still lives in 1987 and thinks digital copies aren't real, so I needed a physical piece of paper to prove I bought office supplies. I opened the printer drawer. You know, that bottom drawer that nobody ever really organizes and just becomes a graveyard for random papers, dried out pens, and instruction manuals for electronics you don't own anymore. I was digging around looking for printer paper, moving aside old birthday cards, and what appeared to be a menu from a Chinese restaurant that definitely doesn't exist anymore, when my hand hit a folder. Not just any folder, but one of those official-looking ones with the little tabs and everything. The kind that says, "I'm organized and I mean business." Naturally, I pulled it out, because when you find a mysterious folder in your own house, you don't just ignore it and move on with your life like some kind of well-adjusted person with boundaries. I opened it, and there, printed in crisp black and white with the kind of formatting that suggested someone spent actual time on this, was a document titled Divorce Strategy. Not thoughts about our marriage, or concerns to discuss, or even reasons I'm unhappy. Nope, straight to divorce strategy, like this was a corporate presentation about quarterly earnings. I had to blink twice, literally close my eyes and open them again like a cartoon character who just saw something unbelievable, because surely I was misreading this. Surely my wife didn't actually create a strategic planning document for dismantling our marriage with the same energy most people use to plan a vacation. But oh, she did. And it got so much better, or worse, depending on your perspective and how much you enjoy watching your life implode in real time. This wasn't just a simple, "I want a divorce" letter. This was a full-blown strategic assault plan with bullet points, subheadings, and what appeared to be a timeline of execution. I'm talking military-grade organization here, the kind of planning that would make a project manager weep with pride. At the top of the page, in bold letters like a mission statement, it said, "Primary objectives: secure the house, maximize alimony payments, protect personal assets." Personal assets. She had personal assets she was protecting from me, her husband, the guy who apparently was such a financial threat that she needed a defensive strategy. The bullet points were what really got me, though. She'd actually made a numbered list of tactical moves, each one more calculated than the last. Number 1. Ask for the house. He renovated it, so he'll feel emotionally attached and won't want to fight. Okay, first of all, rude. Second of all, she's not wrong, which makes it even more rude. I did renovate that house. I spent weekends covered in drywall dust and paint, restructured the entire kitchen layout, fixed plumbing issues that the previous owner had ignored for probably a decade, and turned that place from a dated disaster into something actually nice. But sure, use my own hard work and emotional investment against me. That's totally fair play in the game of marital destruction. Number 2 on her little list: demand alimony. Emphasize lifestyle maintained during marriage, downplay earning potential. This one made me laugh. That bitter kind of laugh that comes out when you're too shocked to cry and too angry to scream. She was planning to pretend she couldn't support herself, that she'd somehow become dependent on my pathetic salary. Her words from the kitchen conversation, not mine, while simultaneously complaining that I didn't make enough money. So which is it, Sabrina? Am I not making enough to satisfy your lifestyle dreams? Or am I making so much that you need to keep extracting it after we're divorced? Pick a lane. Number 3. And this is where it gets truly special. Don't mention his private fund. I froze when I read that line. She knew about the fund. Somehow, despite my very careful financial planning and my general assumption that she didn't pay attention to anything that didn't involve shopping or comparing our life to her friends' lives, she discovered the private investment fund I'd set up years ago. This wasn't some massive fortune or secret wealth. It was just money I'd saved and invested carefully over time. The financial equivalent of actually reading the terms and conditions and making smart decisions. But the fact that her strategy specifically said, "Don't mention," it meant she knew it existed and was planning to pretend she didn't, so I wouldn't think to protect it. But wait, there's more, because apparently Sabrina had the dedication of a method actor preparing for the role of a lifetime. Number 4 on her list. And I need you to appreciate the absolute audacity of this, said, "Practice crying for court appearances." Practice crying. She had scheduled actual rehearsal time for fake emotional breakdowns. This wasn't a spontaneous moment of sadness or genuine grief over a failing marriage. This was a performance piece she was workshopping like she was preparing for Broadway. I imagined her standing in front of the bathroom mirror, trying out different crying styles, maybe timing how long she could hold a sob before it became obvious she was faking it. No, that one's too dramatic. Try the single tear rolling down the cheek. That's more sympathetic. Number 5. Emphasize his lack of ambition and refusal to provide proper lifestyle. There it was in black and white. The narrative she was planning to sell to her lawyer, the judge, probably her friends, and anyone else who would listen. Never mind that I had a stable career, paid all our bills on time, and never once failed to provide anything she actually needed. The problem wasn't that I couldn't provide. It was that I couldn't provide at the same level as Ashley's tech bro husband or Vanessa's dermatologist. I wasn't refusing to give her a proper lifestyle. I was refusing to go into debt pretending to be wealthier than I was just to keep up with people who probably had their own financial problems hidden behind Instagram filters. The document went on for 3 pages. 3 full pages of strategic planning, complete with a section labeled Anticipated Responses and Counterarguments, where she'd literally predicted what I might say in my own defense and prepared rebuttals. It was like reading a chess strategy guide where I was the opponent and she'd already planned 15 moves ahead. There was a timeline suggesting the best month to file for divorce, apparently March, because tax season makes financial discussions easier. Notes about which lawyer to hire based on their aggressive reputation and high success rate. And even a section about how to handle telling mutual friends in a way that positioned her as the victim. I stood there in my home office, holding this folder like it was radioactive, and I had this surreal moment where I wondered if I'd accidentally married a supervillain. This level of planning, this degree of calculated manipulation, this wasn't normal relationship dysfunction. This was Ocean's 11 meets divorce court, and I was apparently the casino she was planning to rob. The scariest part wasn't even the content of the plan. It was the handwriting in the margins. She'd made little notes to herself, reminders and encouragements like, stay strong, and you deserve better, and my personal favorite, he won't see this coming because he trusts you. She was right about that last part. I did trust her, or at least I had trusted her up until approximately 5 minutes ago when I discovered she'd been treating our marriage like a heist movie where she was the mastermind, and I was the oblivious security guard who leaves his post to get coffee at the critical moment. The betrayal wasn't just that she wanted a divorce. People fall out of love, marriages end. I could have handled that like an adult if she'd just been honest about it. No, the betrayal was the premeditation, the cold calculation, the fact that she'd been smiling at me over breakfast while simultaneously plotting exactly how to destroy my financial stability and emotional well-being. I carefully put the document back exactly where I found it, made sure the folder was positioned the same way, even recreated the messy pile of random papers on top of it so she wouldn't know I'd seen it. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline rush you get when you suddenly realize you're in a fight you didn't know you'd entered, and you need to start swinging or you're going to get knocked out. She thought I wouldn't notice. She genuinely believed that I was so oblivious, so trusting, so pathetically devoted that I'd never go looking in printer drawers or question why she suddenly seemed happier or notice that she was documenting our marriage like it was evidence for a trial. Here's what Sabrina didn't know about me, though. The thing she'd fundamentally misunderstood about the man she married. Just because I'm quiet doesn't mean I'm stupid. Just because I'm patient doesn't mean I'm passive. And just because I spend our marriage being kind and accommodating doesn't mean I can't recognize when someone's treating me like a mark in a con game. She wanted to play strategic chess? Fine. But she forgot that engineers are literally trained to solve complex problems, anticipate failures, and build systems that can withstand unexpected stress. She brought a bullet-pointed list to what was about to become a strategic war, and I was about to show her that amateurs plan operations while professionals plan campaigns. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't storm into the living room waving the document and demanding explanations like some dramatic hero in a soap opera. No, I did something much more dangerous. I went back to acting completely normal. I printed my tax receipt like that's what I'd come into the office to do. I walked out. I made dinner. I asked Sabrina about her day with the same casual interest I always had. She had no idea that while she was talking about some drama with her friend group, I was mentally running through everything I knew about asset protection, legal trusts, and exactly how to turn her own strategy against her. That night, lying in bed while she slept peacefully next to me, probably dreaming about her post-divorce life funded by my alimony payments, I stared at the ceiling and smiled in the dark. She'd said I wouldn't see it coming because I trusted her, but she was wrong about one critical thing. I had seen it coming the moment I overheard that kitchen conversation. This document just confirmed what I already knew and gave me the blueprint to her entire plan. She thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers, But what she didn't realize was that I'd been playing chess this whole time. I was just polite enough to let her think she was winning. So I whispered to the darkness, quiet enough that she couldn't hear me. Game on, Sabrina. Game on. You know what's funny about being underestimated? It gives you the kind of freedom that people who are taken seriously never get to experience. Once someone decides you're not a threat, they stop watching their back around you. They get sloppy. They say things they shouldn't say, leave evidence where they shouldn't leave it, and generally operate under the dangerous assumption that you're too dumb, too nice, or too checked out to notice what they're doing. Sabrina had clearly placed me in the harmless husband category, filed me away mentally somewhere between piece of furniture and loyal golden retriever. And that misconception was about to become the most expensive mistake of her life. So I made a decision that probably would have surprised her if she'd been paying any attention. I turned invisible. Not literally, obviously, because that would require either superpowers or some serious scientific breakthrough that my mechanical engineering degree didn't cover. No, I became invisible in the way that people in relationships become invisible when the other person stops seeing them as a full human being. I became background noise, the husband equivalent of elevator music, just sort of there making ambient sounds while she went about her business of plotting my downfall. I stopped asking her about her day with any real interest. I stopped trying to engage her in meaningful conversations about our future, our problems, or anything that required her to acknowledge I had thoughts and feelings. I just smiled, nodded, and existed in the peripheral vision of her life. And let me tell you, it was liberally freeing in the most depressing way possible. When you stop caring what someone thinks of you, when you stop trying to win their approval or fix their perception of you, you suddenly have all this mental energy to redirect toward more productive activities. Like, for instance, building an absolutely bulletproof legal defense and counter strategy that would make her divorce strategy document look like a kindergartner's crayon drawing next to the Mona Lisa. The first thing I did was download an app on her phone, which, by the way, she'd never bothered to password protect for me, because why would she? I was just her harmless husband who fixed squeaky doors and got excited about gas prices. I wasn't a threat. The app was one of those wellness programs, disguised as a hydration reminder because Sabrina was always on some new health kick that lasted approximately 3 days before she forgot about it and moved on to the next trending wellness fad. This particular app reminded you to drink water throughout the day with little notification pings and motivational messages like, stay hydrated, stay healthy. Real wholesome stuff that nobody would ever suspect was actually sophisticated recording software. Here's the beauty of modern technology. It's gotten so advanced that you can basically carry a recording studio in your pocket. And if you're even moderately tech-savvy, you can make that recording studio work for you in ways that would have required an entire van full of surveillance equipment 30 years ago. Every time Sabrina had a phone conversation, every time she met with her friends for a wine night, which was really just a strategy session for how to maximize their divorce settlements. Every time she rehearsed her courtroom tears in the bathroom, thinking she was alone, my phone was saving it in beautiful high-definition audio. She talked to her lawyer, a guy named Marcus who sounded like he'd watched one too many episodes of Suits and thought being aggressive was a personality trait. I listened to her describe me as financially controlling despite the fact that she had full access to all our accounts and spent money whenever she wanted on whatever she wanted. She called me emotionally unavailable, which was particularly rich coming from someone who'd stopped having real conversations with me 6 months ago. She even told Marcus that I'd refused to let her pursue her career, which was creative fiction at its finest considering she'd quit her marketing job 3 years ago because she said it was too stressful, and I'd supported that decision without question. The best part, though, the absolute chef's kiss moment that almost made me laugh out loud when I heard it, was when she practiced her crying for her friend Ashley. I'm not kidding. She actually called Ashley on speakerphone and said, "Okay, I'm going to practice my testimony about how hurt I am, and you tell me if it sounds believable." Then she proceeded to deliver this performance about how I'd crushed her dreams and made her feel small, complete with fake sobs that sounded like a cat coughing up a hairball. Ashley, being the supportive friend that she was, gave her notes. Actual director's notes. Maybe less sobbing, more quiet pain. Judges respond better to dignified suffering. I saved that recording with the kind of care most people reserve for their wedding photos. I labeled it Oscar nomination and tucked it away in a secure cloud folder that Sabrina didn't even know existed, along with about 30 other recordings of her plotting, scheming, and generally being the kind of person who deserves a Lifetime Achievement Award in duplicity. Every phone call with her mother where they discussed how to hide her inheritance from the divorce proceedings. Every conversation with Marcus where they strategized about making me look like a controlling monster. Every girl's night where her friends coached her on how to cry on command and which outfit would make her look most sympathetic in court. All of it, saved, time-stamped, and ready to be used. Meanwhile, during the day, I maintained my cover as the oblivious husband so convincingly that I almost believed it myself. I went to work, came home, made dinner, watched TV, and acted like everything was completely normal. When Sabrina came home from her errands, that I knew were actually meetings with her lawyer, I'd ask how her day was with the kind of mild interest you'd show a stranger in an elevator. She'd say fine, with that dismissive tone she'd perfected, and I'd nod and go back to whatever I was pretending to be interested in on my laptop. She started getting bolder, more careless. She'd leave her laptop open with email exchanges with Marcus visible on the screen. She'd take phone calls in the next room, thinking the wall was enough privacy, not realizing that the same acoustic design that let me hear her kitchen conversation with her mother worked throughout the entire house. She'd go out for drinks with her friends and come home slightly tipsy, mumbling to herself about the plan and how she was so close to freedom. One night, she literally walked past me on the couch and said, "Soon I won't have to look at your face anymore," under her breath like I couldn't hear her. I just smiled and kept scrolling through my phone, but internally I was thinking, oh honey, the face you won't be looking at is your own reflection when you realize how badly you miscalculated. I started documenting everything, not just the recordings, but physical evidence too. Every credit card statement showing her spending habits. Every text message where she complained to her friends about our poverty while posting photos of expensive brunches and designer handbags. Every social media post where she hinted at being in an unhappy marriage, carefully crafted to make her look like a victim while making me look like some kind of oppressive villain who was holding her back from her dreams. I screenshot everything, saved everything, organized everything into folders with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that would make a librarian weep with joy. Her friend Vanessa came over one afternoon for coffee, and I happened to be home working in my office. They sat in the kitchen. Of course they sat in the kitchen, because apparently that had become Sabrina's war room, and talked about the divorce like it was already a done deal. Vanessa asked if she was worried about me fighting back, and Sabrina laughed. Actually laughed. She said, "He won't fight. He's too polite to make a scene. He'll probably just sign whatever I put in front of him because he's too soft to deal with conflict." I sat in my office, listening through my own recording app, and smiled. She thought politeness was weakness. She thought avoiding conflict meant being incapable of it. She'd fundamentally confused being nice with being stupid, and that confusion was going to cost her everything. Because here's the thing about actually nice people, the genuinely kind folks who go through life trying not to hurt others and treating people with respect. When you back them into a corner and attack them with the kind of calculated cruelty that Sabrina was displaying, they don't fight like people who are used to fighting. They fight like people who have nothing left to lose and unlimited creativity for solving problems. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the hot, explosive way I'd been when I first overheard her kitchen conversation. That anger had cooled into something much more dangerous, a cold, calculated determination to win. She wanted to play games? I'd show her what happens when you challenge an engineer to solve a problem. We literally get paid to find weaknesses in systems and fix them. And Sabrina's entire strategy was just a system full of exploitable weaknesses. She told her friend Marcus, during one of their phone calls that I recorded with the dedication of a court stenographer, he doesn't even know about the trust. I never told him about the house structure, and he's too dumb to check property records. That recording was particularly delicious because she was dead wrong on both counts. I knew exactly what the property structure was because I'd set it up. The house wasn't in our names. It was owned by a holding company I'd created years before we got married, back when I was being too careful and too paranoid, according to her. She lived in that house thinking it was marital property, thinking her name on the mortgage meant she had ownership, not understanding that the mortgage and the actual property title were two very different things. But I didn't correct her. I didn't drop hints or try to warn her that she was building her entire strategy on a foundation that didn't exist. I just let her keep talking, keep planning, keep revealing every card in her hand while I quietly stacked my own deck. She thought I was playing checkers while she played chess, but the truth was I'd been playing three-dimensional chess this whole time, and she'd just been moving pieces around on a board that didn't matter. Every evening, I'd sit with her at dinner, making small talk about nothing important, and she'd smile at me with this condescending patience like she was counting down the days until she could finally be free of her boring husband and his pathetic salary. She'd check her phone constantly, probably texting Marcus or her friends about the latest developments in Operation Divorce, and I'd pretend not to notice or care. I'd do the dishes, clean up the kitchen, maybe fix something around the house that needed attention, playing the role of the dutiful husband who had no idea his world was about to implode. The best part was how confident she got. She started talking about her post-divorce plans right in front of me, not even bothering to be subtle anymore. She'd tell her friends on speakerphone about the renovations she wanted to do to her house, the furniture she was going to buy with her alimony, the trips she was planning to take once she was finally free. She described this whole fantasy life funded by my money, lived in my house, enabled by her successful exploitation of someone who'd done nothing but love and support her. And I'd just nod along, make appropriate noises of agreement, and think about how absolutely spectacular it was going to be when reality came crashing through her delusions like a wrecking ball through tissue paper. She wanted everything. She was about to get exactly what she deserved, which, spoiler alert, was absolutely nothing she was expecting. I gave her enough rope to hang herself with, and she was enthusiastically braiding it into a noose while thinking she was making a designer accessory. Every day she got more careless, more open about her plans, more convinced that I was too stupid and too passive to be a threat. And every day, I collected more evidence, refined my counter-strategy, and waited for the perfect moment to reveal that the husband she thought was soft was actually made of something much harder, and that too polite to fight had just been code for smart enough to let you defeat yourself. The day finally arrived with all the ceremony of a funeral, which was fitting because our marriage was definitely dead, and we were just here to make it official. Sabrina had scheduled the signing for a Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock, which I found oddly specific until I realized she'd probably consulted some article about the best time to ambush your husband with divorce papers. Or maybe her astrologer told her Mercury was in the right position for financial devastation. She'd been buzzing around the house all morning with this barely contained excitement, like a kid on Christmas Eve who knows exactly what present they're getting and can't wait to rip it open. Her lawyer, Mr. Marcus Tanner, showed up 15 minutes early because apparently being punctual is how lawyers justify their hourly rates. He walked into our house. Well, technically my house, but we'll get to that. Wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment and a tie that screamed, "I win divorces for a living and I'm very good at it." Everything about him was calculated to intimidate, from his overly firm handshake to the way he set his expensive leather briefcase on our dining table like he was claiming territory. He had this smug energy radiating off him, the kind of confidence that comes from winning too many cases against unprepared opponents who didn't see him coming. He looked at me like I was a particularly easy puzzle he was about to solve in record time, gave me this patronizing smile, and said, "Thank you for being reasonable about this process. It'll make everything so much smoother for everyone involved." Translation: "Thank you for being a doormat I'm about to wipe my shoes on." I just nodded politely, because at this point I'd perfected the art of looking harmless while mentally planning someone's legal destruction. It's a skill, really. You smile, you agree, you let them think they've already won, and then you wait for the perfect moment to flip the board. Sabrina sat down across from me at the dining table we'd picked out together 3 years ago at some furniture store where she'd spent 2 hours debating between oak and walnut finishes. She was wearing this outfit that was clearly chosen for maximum, "I'm the victim here" impact. A simple dress, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a way that said, "I'm too devastated to care about my appearance," even though I knew she'd spent 45 minutes getting ready because I heard her blow dryer running. She had her sympathetic face on, the one she'd been practicing in the bathroom mirror, and when she looked at me her eyes had this carefully crafted sadness that would have been Oscar-worthy if I didn't know it was completely fake. Marcus slid the divorce papers across the table with the kind of theatrical flair that suggested he'd done this exact move hundreds of times and probably practiced it in front of a mirror. The papers were thick, official-looking, the kind of document that weighs heavy in your hands because of what it represents. I could see sections highlighted in yellow, sticky tabs marking where I needed to sign, little arrows pointing to signature lines like they were worried I might miss them. At the top of the first page, in bold letters, it said dissolution of marriage, which is such a cold, clinical way to describe the end of something that was supposed to last forever. Sabrina reached across the table and put her hand on mine in this gesture that was probably supposed to seem compassionate, but just felt condescending. "Thank you for not making this harder than it needs to be," she said, and her voice had this soft, grateful quality that made me want to laugh. She actually thought she was being gracious by allowing me to participate in my own financial execution without putting up a fight. I know this isn't easy for either of us, but I think we can both agree this is for the best. We've grown apart, and there's no point in dragging this out. I looked at her, really looked at her, and tried to remember when exactly this person I'd married had turned into someone I didn't recognize. Was it gradual? Was there a specific moment? Or had she always been this person, and I'd just been too blind to see it? But this wasn't the time for philosophical reflection about the nature of love and betrayal. This was the time to play my part perfectly. "You're right," I said, and I meant it in ways she couldn't possibly understand. "You deserve everything." I watched her face light up at those words, watched the little smile that played at the corners of her mouth as she interpreted my statement exactly the way she wanted to. She thought I meant everything I own. What I actually meant was everything that's about to happen to you. Funny how the same words can mean completely different things depending on who's listening. Marcus looked pleased, like I'd just made his job significantly easier by being the cooperative husband who wasn't going to waste his time with lengthy negotiations. He probably had another client scheduled right after this, another marriage to dissolve, another person to financially dismantle. He pulled out his fancy pen, the kind that probably cost more than a week's worth of groceries, and clicked it with this authoritative snap. "Excellent. If you could just sign on each of the marked pages, we can get this finalized and move forward with the proceedings." I picked up my own pen, the same one I'd been using for years, nothing fancy or expensive about it. Just a regular blue ballpoint that had signed mortgage documents, birthday cards, work contracts, and now apparently divorce papers. There was something poetic about using this ordinary pen for such an extraordinary moment, though the poetry was probably lost on everyone else in the room. I flipped through the pages, pretending to skim them even though I'd already memorized every single clause, every single term, every single way Sabrina thought she was about to screw me over. The papers outlined everything she wanted. The house, alimony payments that would have kept me living in a cardboard box under a bridge, half of my retirement fund, even my car because apparently hers wasn't reliable enough for her new single life. It was a masterpiece of legal theft, really. If she'd put this much effort into our actual marriage, we probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. But she'd saved all her creativity and strategic thinking for this moment, for this document that was supposed to represent her victory and my defeat. I signed each page with steady hands, not showing any emotion, not giving them the satisfaction of seeing me upset or angry or anything other than calm and accepting. Marcus collected the papers like they were treasure maps, sliding them back into his briefcase with the care of someone handling something valuable. Sabrina looked at me with this mixture of relief and triumph, probably thinking about all the ways she was going to spend my money once the divorce was finalized. "Thank you," she said again, and this time she actually sounded sincere. "I know you'll move on and be fine. You're good at adapting." That was her way of saying, "You're good at settling for less." But I let it slide because I was too busy thinking about what was coming next. They stood up. Marcus shook my hand again with that same condescending grip, and Sabrina gave me an awkward hug that felt like hugging a stranger who was trying to steal your wallet. As they walked toward the door, probably already planning their celebration lunch where they'd toast to her successful divorce strategy, I sat at that dining table and smiled to myself. I'd just signed those papers with the same pen I'd used 3 years ago to register the trust that secretly owned our house, the same pen I'd used to create the shell company that held all our major assets, the same pen that had protected me from exactly this scenario long before I ever thought I'd need protection. Sabrina thought she'd won. Marcus thought he'd earned his fee, and I sat there knowing that the real show hadn't even started yet. They wanted everything? Well, they were about to discover that everything was a lot less than they thought, and nothing was exactly what they deserved. The papers were signed, the performance was over, and the curtain was about to rise on Act 2, the part where reality comes knocking and nobody answers the door prepared. A week after the signing ceremony that Sabrina probably had marked on her calendar with little celebration emojis, she moved into what she now called her house, with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for lottery winners or people who just found out they're getting a kidney transplant. I'd moved my stuff out into a modest apartment across town. Nothing fancy, just a basic 2-bedroom with functional appliances and neighbors who minded their own business. The kind of place that didn't scream success but didn't whisper failure either, perfectly designed to make Sabrina think I was struggling while she was thriving. Meanwhile, she descended upon that house like a decorator possessed by the ghost of every HGTV show ever made. The transformation started immediately, and I know this because I still had access to the security cameras I'd installed 2 years ago when we had that break-in scare in the neighborhood. Funny how she never thought to ask me to remove my access, probably because in her mind I was already irrelevant, just a sad ex-husband who'd slunk away defeated. She had contractors in there within 48 hours, painting walls that didn't need painting and ripping out perfectly good fixtures because they didn't match her new aesthetic. I watched from my phone as she directed workers to paint the living room this aggressive shade of blush pink that looked like Pepto-Bismol had an identity crisis. The kitchen got new cabinet hardware, gold instead of the brushed nickel I'd installed. Because apparently gold was more luxurious, and she was done with my budget choices. Her mom, Lorraine, showed up on day 3 with a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than she should have spent, and the two of them had this whole celebration scene in the living room that would have been touching if it wasn't built on a foundation of complete delusion. I couldn't hear what they were saying through the camera feed, but I could see them toasting, laughing, Lorraine gesturing around the room like she was admiring a palace instead of a suburban 3-bedroom that was about to become a very expensive lesson in reading property documents. They looked so happy, so victorious, like they'd just conquered enemy territory instead of moving into a house that legally belonged to a shell company they didn't know existed. Sabrina went full influencer mode with the redecorating, posting everything on social media like her life had suddenly become a lifestyle brand. She bought new furniture, a white sectional couch that looked like it would stain if you looked at it wrong, some abstract art pieces that probably cost a fortune and looked like something a kindergartner made during free time, and throw pillows that served no functional purpose except to be artfully arranged for photos. Every room got the Instagram treatment, strategic lighting, carefully placed plants that she'd definitely kill within a month, and those wooden signs with inspirational quotes like, "She believed she could, so she did, and new beginnings start here." The master bedroom, the same room where we'd slept together for 3 years, got completely purged of any evidence I'd ever existed. She replaced the bedding with something fluffy and white that looked impossible to keep clean, hung sheer curtains that let in too much morning light, and installed this ridiculous chandelier that was way too fancy for a suburban bedroom. She posted a photo of it with the caption, "Finally living in MY space, designed MY way," with about 15 hashtags including hashtag fresh start, hashtag living my best life, and my personal favorite, hashtag freedom feels good. The comments section was full of her friends hyping her up, telling her she deserved this, calling her a queen, all of them completely unaware that they were celebrating a woman who was essentially redecorating a house she didn't own. She renamed it too, because apparently just living there wasn't enough, it needed a rebrand. She ordered one of those custom signs for the front porch that said, "Sabrina's Sanctuary," in that cursive font that every basic home decor enthusiast loves. A sanctuary. She turned my investment property into her personal sanctuary, complete with matching doormats and seasonal wreaths. She even started a home Instagram account separate from her personal one, calling it Sabrina's Sanctuary with a bio that read, "Creating my dream space one room at a time, Sparkles house with garden to hearts." Her friends came over constantly those first 2 weeks, and I watched through the cameras as they had their wine nights and girls' brunches, all of them sitting on that overpriced white couch admiring what Sabrina had built for herself. Ashley brought over a housewarming gift, some expensive candles that probably smelled like financial irresponsibility. Vanessa showed up with flowers and spent an hour taking photos for her own Instagram, because apparently being friends with someone who won a divorce was social media gold. They all acted like Sabrina had achieved something monumental instead of just signing papers that were about to backfire spectacularly. I sat in my modest apartment, eating takeout Thai food and watching this circus unfold on my phone like it was the world's most expensive reality TV show. Every new piece of furniture she bought, every contractor she hired, every paint color she chose. It was all adding up on credit cards and loans that she thought she could afford because she was banking on alimony payments that were never going to materialize. She was spending money like someone who'd already won the lottery, not realizing the ticket was fake. The best part was her social media presence, which had transformed from occasional food photos and vacation pictures into a full-blown documentation of her journey to independence. She posted daily updates about her decorating decisions, her morning routines in her space, inspirational quotes about leaving toxic situations and choosing yourself. One post showed her sitting on that ridiculous white couch with a coffee mug that said "Boss Babe," captioned, "Sometimes you have to let go of what's holding you back to make room for what lifts you up." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Her followers ate it up. The like counts were impressive, the comments were supportive, and everyone seemed genuinely happy for her transformation from trapped wife to independent woman. Nobody questioned how she could afford all these renovations on her supposedly non-existent income. Nobody wondered why she was living so lavishly if she'd just left a husband with a pathetic salary. They just celebrated with her, shared her posts, and contributed to the narrative that she was thriving. Meanwhile, I was just drinking tea. Literally drinking tea, not spilling it yet, and watching this whole elaborate fantasy play out. I could have stopped it at any moment, could have made a phone call to her or her lawyer and explained the situation, maybe saved her from this embarrassing performance. But where's the learning opportunity in that? Sometimes people need to build their castle completely before they realize they built it on quicksand. Sometimes the lesson needs to be spectacular to be effective. She even threw a housewarming party at the end of the second week, inviting all her friends and some people I didn't even recognize. I watched through the cameras as they mingled in the living room, admired the renovations, complimented her taste, and celebrated her new chapter. Lorraine made a toast. I could see her raising her glass in the camera frame, probably saying something about her daughter's strength and independence. Everyone cheered. Someone popped champagne. It was a whole production. And the entire time, sitting in my apartment with my phone in one hand and documents in the other, I was just waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for her to get comfortable in her victory. Waiting for the pink curtains to go up and the gold hardware to be installed and the Sabrina's Sanctuary sign to be mounted. Because the higher she climbed on this ladder of delusion, the more spectacular the fall was going to be. She thought she'd won the house. She thought she'd escaped. She thought she'd built herself a kingdom. And technically, she was right about one thing. It was about to become a sanctuary. Just not hers. More like a sanctuary for lessons about reading legal documents and not underestimating quiet people who know how to use property law. The pink curtains went up on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, I'd made the phone call. And just like that, the pin was pulled on the grenade she'd been sitting on this whole time, completely unaware it was about to explode. 2 days after the pink curtains went up, those god-awful pink curtains that looked like they belonged in a dollhouse designed by someone with no concept of subtlety, Sabrina got the phone call that would fundamentally alter her understanding of reality. I know the exact moment it happened because I was at work, sitting in my office during lunch break, eating jollof rice from this amazing Nigerian restaurant down the street that made everything with the perfect amount of spice. I'd been having a pretty decent day, actually. Solved a design problem that had been bugging me all week, got complimented by my boss on a project proposal, and was generally just vibing in that peaceful space that comes from knowing you're about to ruin someone's entire month. My phone was sitting on my desk, facing up, and I watched as Sabrina's contact photo flashed across the screen. I didn't answer. Not yet. Let her simmer a bit, I thought, taking another bite of rice. The phone stopped ringing, was silent for maybe 30 seconds, then started up again. Still didn't answer. This was too delicious to rush. By the third call, which came approximately 45 seconds after the second one ended, I figured I'd let her suffer enough and picked up, putting on my most casual, unbothered voice. "Hey, what's up?" I said, like I was just answering a normal call from someone I used to know instead of the woman who tried to financially destroy me. What came through the phone can only be described as a primal scream wrapped in words. "What the hell did you do?" She wasn't asking a question. She was making an accusation, demanding an explanation, and having a complete breakdown all in one breath. Her voice had that particular quality that comes from crying and yelling simultaneously, that ugly cry voice that's all nasal and broken and completely devoid of the composed, strategic persona she'd been maintaining. I took another bite of rice, chewed it slowly, swallowed. "I'm gonna need you to be more specific, Sabrina. What are we talking about here?" "The house," she shrieked, and I had to pull the phone away from my ear because she was hitting decibel levels that could probably shatter glass. "The trust. The company. What did you do?" So Marcus had finally done his due diligence. Better late than never, I suppose, though never would have been funnier from my perspective. "I didn't do anything," I said calmly, deliberately keeping my tone as level and unbothered as possible because nothing makes an angry person angrier than someone being calm when they're losing it. "I just signed the papers like you asked. Marcus just called me." She was hyperventilating now, words coming out in gasps between sobs. He said the house isn't in your name. He said it belongs to some company called Torex Holdings. He said I signed papers as a tenant." "What does that mean? What did you do?" I set down my fork, leaned back in my office chair, and smiled at the ceiling. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the payoff for weeks of playing dumb and letting her think she'd won. Torex Holdings is a shell company I created 6 years ago, before we even got married. The house is owned by that company, which is controlled by a trust. Your name was never on the actual property title, just the mortgage agreement. You were basically renting from my company this whole time. The silence that followed was magnificent. Not actual silence, because I could hear her breathing in that rapid, panicked way people breathe when their entire world is collapsing, but silence in terms of words. Her brain was clearly trying to process information that didn't fit into the narrative she'd constructed, like trying to force a square peg through a round hole, except the peg was made of lies, and the hole was reality. You can't. That's illegal," she finally sputtered. "You tricked me. You had assets." "Actually, I didn't hide anything. The information was publicly available in property records. You just never bothered to check because you assumed you knew everything. I was enjoying this way too much, and I'm not even sorry about it. And it's not illegal to own property through a company. Lots of people do it for asset protection. I just happened to set it up before I knew I'd need protection from my own wife." She was full-on sobbing now, that ugly crying that comes from realizing you've been outsmarted by someone you thought was stupid. "This isn't fair. I lived in that house. I decorated it. I made it a home. With my money, I added helpfully. On my property, while planning to take everything from me. Yeah, that must be really disappointing for you. You can't do this to me." Her voice had gone from angry to desperate, that pleading tone people use when they realize they're screwed and are trying to appeal to emotions that stopped existing weeks ago. "I have nowhere to go. I spent money on renovations. I had contractors. The furniture." "Sounds like a you problem," I said, and I meant it. "You should have read the documents more carefully before you signed them. But hey, look on the bright side. You got really good at practicing crying, so at least all that rehearsal is paying off now." "I hate you," she screamed, and then there was a crash in the background like she'd thrown something. "You're a monster. You manipulated everything." "No, Sabrina. You manipulated everything. I just didn't fall for it." I kept my voice steady, refusing to match her energy because staying calm was the ultimate power move. "You wanted to take my house, my money, my future, all because I wasn't rich enough for your Instagram fantasy life. You practiced fake tears to manipulate a judge. You plotted with your mother about how to destroy me financially. You called me soft, pathetic, not a real man. So excuse me if I don't feel particularly sympathetic that your evil plan backfired." She was making these weird, choking sounds now, trying to form words, but failing because rage and devastation were short-circuiting her brain. I heard Lorraine's voice in the background, muffled but distinct, saying something like, "What's wrong? What happened?" And I almost felt bad for Lorraine. Almost. But then I remembered her sitting in that kitchen telling her daughter to take me for everything, calling me too soft to fight, and the sympathy evaporated. You wouldn't do this to someone you once loved, Sabrina finally managed to say, pulling out the guilt card like it was going to work on someone she'd spent months treating like garbage. I laughed. Actually laughed. You're absolutely right. I wouldn't do this to someone I once loved. Luckily, I stopped loving you the moment I heard you and your mother plotting my destruction in our kitchen. That was months ago, by the way. I've had a lot of time to process my feelings and prepare my response. This isn't over, she threatened, but her voice had lost all its power. She sounded defeated, broken, nothing like the confident woman who'd slid divorce papers across the table with that victory smile. Oh, it's definitely over, I said. The divorce is finalized. The house is mine. You have no legal claim to anything. Marcus knows this now. That's why he called you freaking out, because he realized he based his entire strategy on information you gave him that was completely wrong. You played yourself, Sabrina. I just watched. She was crying so hard now that I could barely understand what she was saying. Something about lawyers and fighting this, and how I'd regret it. But I was done with the conversation. I'd said what needed to be said, delivered the reality check she'd been avoiding, and now I had jollof rice getting cold on my desk. Hey, Sabrina, I said, cutting off her rant mid-sentence. Remember when you said I was too polite to fight? How's that working out for you? And then I hung up. Just pressed the end call button mid-breakdown, cutting off her sob with the digital finality of a phone disconnecting. My screen went black, showing my reflection, and I was smiling. Not a cruel smile, not an evil villain smile, just the satisfied smile of someone who'd just won a game they never wanted to play but played anyway and dominated completely. I picked up my fork, took another bite of jollof rice, and thought about how quiet victories taste better than any meal ever could. She wanted drama, wanted a big confrontation, wanted me to feel bad or guilty or conflicted. But I just felt relief. Relief that I'd never have to deal with her manipulation again. Relief that justice, for once, actually showed up on time. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from her. Multiple texts, actually, coming in rapid succession, all caps, lots of exclamation points, the digital equivalent of a breakdown. I didn't read them. Just silenced her number and went back to my lunch, because some conversations deserve to end mid-sentence, and some people deserve to scream into the void where nobody's listening anymore. Sabrina's first instinct after realizing she'd been completely outmaneuvered wasn't to quietly accept defeat and learn from her mistakes like a mature adult. No, that would have required self-awareness and humility, two qualities she'd apparently never developed. Instead, she did what every modern person does when reality doesn't cooperate with their narrative. She took to social media to play the victim. Within hours of our phone call, her Instagram and Facebook accounts erupted with posts that would have made a soap opera writer say, "Tone it down a bit." The first post appeared around dinner time. A black and white photo of her sitting on that expensive white couch looking contemplative and sad, staring off into the distance like she was in a perfume commercial for a fragrance called Betrayal. The caption read, "Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who hurt you deepest. Never trust a man who smiles while you cry. Lessons learned the hard way. Broken heart. #betrayed. #trust issues. #stronger than ever." The comments section immediately filled up with her friends offering support, posting heart emojis, and "you deserve better queen" messages, all of them completely unaware of the actual story. I watched this unfold from my apartment with the kind of detached amusement you get from watching a movie where you already know the ending. She was trying to control the narrative, paint herself as the wounded party, the innocent victim of a conniving husband who'd somehow wronged her. Ashley commented, "He never deserved you anyway, babe." And Vanessa added, "Men are trash. You're going to get through this." Even Lorraine joined in with, "My daughter is a survivor," which was particularly rich coming from someone who'd actively encouraged the whole scheme. For about 6 hours, it worked. Her post got hundreds of likes, dozens of supportive comments, shares from friends who thought they were supporting someone going through a tough divorce. She posted a few more in quick succession. Inspirational quotes about Phoenix rising from ashes, photos of herself looking brave and resilient, even a video of her doing yoga in the living room with a caption about finding inner peace despite chaos. It was a whole PR campaign designed to make her look sympathetic and me look like a monster. But here's the thing about trying to rewrite history in the age of technology. Someone always has receipts. And I had recordings. Lots of them. particularly one very special recording that I'd been saving for exactly this kind of situation, the one where she practiced her fake crying with Ashley, complete with director's notes about making it more dignified suffering instead of ugly sobbing. I debated whether to release it, whether stooping to her level was worth it, but then I remembered something important. Sometimes people need to face the consequences of their actions, and sometimes those consequences need to be public. I didn't post it directly. That would have been too obvious, too aggressive, and honestly beneath me. Instead, I sent it to exactly 3 people: Ashley, Vanessa, and one mutual friend named Derek, who I knew couldn't keep a secret if his life depended on it and loved drama more than he loved breathing. I sent it with no context, no explanation, just the audio file labeled Sabrina_practice_session.mp3, and let nature take its course. Derek posted it within an hour. Not the whole thing, just a carefully edited clip that captured the essence. Sabrina saying, "Okay, I'm going to practice my testimony about how hurt I am. You tell me if it sounds believable," followed by her theatrical sobbing, followed by Ashley's critique about needing more quiet pain. He posted it on his Instagram story with the caption, "When you find out your friend's divorce drama is actually an audition performing arts hot beverage," and tagged Sabrina without thinking about the consequences because Derek lived for chaos. The story spread like wildfire through their social circle. Within 2 hours, I watched as the supportive comments on Sabrina's posts started changing tone. The heart emojis disappeared. The "You Go Girl" messages stopped. Instead, people started asking questions. Wait, is this real? Did you actually practice crying? So you lied about everything? Some people deleted their supportive comments entirely, probably embarrassed they'd been fooled. Others left their comments up, but added new ones expressing disappointment or confusion. Sabrina tried damage control, posting a long explanation about how the audio was taken out of context and manipulated, and that I was weaponizing private conversations to make her look bad. But the problem with claiming something is out of context is that people wanted the full context, and once they started digging, they found her other posts. The ones from a week ago celebrating her new house, showing off expensive furniture, living this luxurious lifestyle, despite claiming in divorce papers that she had no income and needed alimony. The math wasn't mathing, as the kids say, and people noticed. Ashley, to her credit or maybe her shame, went completely silent on social media. Vanessa made a vague post about staying out of other people's business, which was basically an admission that she was abandoning ship. Other friends who'd been cheerleading Sabrina's divorce just days earlier suddenly had nothing to say, their silence speaking louder than any supportive comment could have. The best comment came from someone I didn't even know, a friend of a friend who wrote, "So let me get this straight. You practiced fake crying, tried to take everything from your husband, failed because he was smarter than you thought, and now you're mad that he didn't just let you rob him? Girl, that's not betrayal, that's consequences." It got 47 likes before Sabrina deleted the entire post, but screenshots live forever, and someone had already captured it and shared it in what I can only assume was a group chat dedicated to local drama. Her follower count started dropping. Not dramatically. This wasn't some influencer cancellation where she lost thousands overnight, but steadily, consistently, people quietly unfollowing or unfriending her as they realized they'd been supporting someone who wasn't quite the victim she'd claimed to be. Her carefully curated image of the strong, independent woman escaping a bad marriage crumbled under the weight of actual evidence that she'd been the architect of her own destruction. Lorraine, predictably, tried to defend her daughter with a Facebook post about lies and manipulation and how some men will do anything to avoid taking responsibility. But even that backfired when someone commented, "Ma'am, your daughter literally practiced fake crying. There's audio evidence." Lorraine deleted her post within an hour, and I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd stopped attending her bridge club because apparently Carol and Linda had some questions about her daughter's character that she couldn't answer. The social media meltdown culminated in Sabrina making her accounts private, which in the digital age is basically admitting defeat. She went from posting daily updates about her fabulous new life to complete radio silence, hiding behind privacy settings like someone who just realized the internet never forgets and screenshots are forever. Her Sabrina's Sanctuary home Instagram account got deleted entirely, all those carefully staged photos of her pink paradise vanishing as if they'd never existed. I didn't gloat publicly. I didn't post my own version of events or try to further humiliate her. I just watched it all unfold with the quiet satisfaction of someone who didn't have to say a word because the truth spoke for itself. Sometimes karma doesn't need your help. It just needs a little audio file and a friend named Derek who can't resist good drama. My own social media remained unchanged, still just occasional photos of food, work projects, random thoughts about sports or movies. I didn't mention the divorce, didn't reference Sabrina, didn't play the victim or the victor. I just existed, living my life, while hers imploded in real time for everyone to see. Because here's the thing about being genuinely wronged versus playing the victim. When you're actually innocent, you don't need to convince anyone. The evidence speaks for itself. Meanwhile, I sat in my apartment, scrolling through the aftermath of her social media disaster while drinking coffee and thinking about starting that podcast I joked about. Soft Men Don't Play had a nice ring to it. Maybe I'd make it about strategic thinking or property law, or just general life lessons about not underestimating quiet people. The content practically wrote itself, and I had a feeling there'd be at least one very dedicated hate listener tuning in from behind her private account settings, learning lessons she should have learned months ago. Exactly 1 month after the divorce papers were signed, because I believe in letting things marinate properly before serving them. Eviction day arrived with all the ceremony of a bank foreclosure and none of the sympathy. I'd given Sabrina more than enough time to figure out her living situation, find a new place, come to terms with reality, or at least start packing. But according to my property manager, Linda, who'd been keeping me updated with the enthusiasm of someone who clearly loved drama, Sabrina had done none of those things. She was still living in that house like nothing had changed, like the pink curtains and gold cabinet hardware had somehow granted her squatter's rights. I showed up at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, driving my regular car that Sabrina used to complain wasn't nice enough, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt because I didn't need a suit to reclaim my own property. Linda was already there, a professional woman in her 50s who'd been in property management for 20 years and had seen every kind of tenant drama imaginable. Next to her stood a locksmith named Joe, a guy who looked like he'd changed 1,000 locks and wasn't impressed by anyone's sob story anymore. The three of us stood on the porch under that ridiculous Sabrina's Sanctuary sign, and I have to admit, I took a moment to appreciate the irony before ringing the doorbell. Sabrina answered looking like she hadn't slept in days, which she probably hadn't. Her hair was in a messy bun that wasn't the intentional Instagram kind, more like the I've given up on life kind. She was wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt, no makeup, eyes red and puffy from what I assumed was a combination of crying and reality finally setting in. When she saw me standing there with Linda and Joe, her face went through about 5 emotions in 2 seconds: shock, anger, disbelief, fear, and finally resignation. "You can't do this," she said, but her voice had no fight left in it. It was the verbal equivalent of a white flag, a last-ditch attempt at resistance from someone who knew they'd already lost. "Actually, I can," I replied calmly, gesturing to Linda. "This is Linda, the property manager for Torex Holdings. You've been served eviction papers, you ignored them, and your 30 days are up. We're here to reclaim the property." The inside of the house hit me like a lavender-scented slap to the face. She'd really gone all out with the renovations, and walking through rooms I used to know was like touring someone else's Pinterest board come to life. The living room with its pink walls and white furniture, the kitchen with its unnecessary gold hardware, the bedroom with that absurd chandelier, all of it was there, a monument to expensive mistakes and poor financial planning. Sabrina followed us through the house like a ghost haunting her own life choices, not saying much, occasionally starting sentences that died in her throat. She tried one last guilt trip as we stood in the living room, surrounded by furniture she'd bought with money she didn't have. "You wouldn't do this to someone you once loved," she said, recycling the same line from our phone call because apparently her script needed updating. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no residual affection, just a blank space where emotions used to be. "You're right," I said with a small smile. "I wouldn't do this to someone I once loved. Luckily, I stopped loving you months ago, right around the time you and your mother were planning my financial destruction over Chardonnay." Joe the locksmith started working on the front door, the sound of his drill cutting through the awkward silence. Linda was doing a walkthrough, documenting the unauthorized changes Sabrina had made to the property, taking photos of the pink walls and expensive fixtures that would all need to be addressed. Sabrina just stood there, watching her sanctuary dissolve around her like cotton candy in the rain. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, and for the first time since this whole thing started, she sounded genuinely lost instead of manipulative. "I don't know, Sabrina. Maybe your mom's place? The same kitchen where you planned all this," I suggested, not unkindly, just stating the obvious. "You had a month to figure this out. You chose to spend that time redecorating and posting on Instagram instead of apartment hunting. Again, that's a you problem." The locksmith finished with a satisfying click, holding up a new set of keys that Sabrina would never have copies of. Linda handed me the keys with a professional nod, the transfer of power complete and documented. The house was officially mine again, purged of the person who'd tried to steal it through manipulation and legal maneuvering. As we walked toward the door, Sabrina made one final attempt at salvaging something from this disaster. "The furniture," she said quickly. "At least let me take the furniture I bought." I paused, considered it for exactly 2 seconds, then shook my head. "The lease agreement you signed, the one you didn't read carefully, states that any improvements or additions to the property become part of the property. You renovated my house with your poor financial choices. Thanks for the upgrades, I guess." We stepped outside into the sunshine, leaving Sabrina standing in her former sanctuary, surrounded by pink walls and expensive mistakes. Joe changed the lock one final time, the mechanism clicking into place with the finality of a judge's gavel. Linda handed me the complete set of keys, and just like that, the house was mine again, or as I like to call it now, poetic real estate. Justice served with a side of renovations I didn't ask for, but would eventually paint over, because pink walls weren't really my style. As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Sabrina standing on the porch, smaller and smaller in the distance, a cautionary tale about underestimating quiet people and overestimating your own cleverness. I didn't feel triumphant or cruel, just relieved that this chapter was finally closed, locked, and permanently in my rearview mirror where it belonged. So here's where we are now, a few months after the dust settled and the pink paint finally got covered with something more reasonable. A nice neutral beige that doesn't make me feel like I'm living inside a bottle of Pepto-Bismol. Sabrina lives with her mother again, back in that same house where this whole mess started, sitting in that same kitchen where she and Lorraine plotted my destruction over wine and bad judgment. The irony is so perfect it almost feels scripted, like the universe has a screenwriter with a dark sense of humor and a commitment to poetic justice. I heard through mutual acquaintances, because even when you cut someone out of your life, small towns and social circles ensure you still get updates whether you want them or not, that she's working retail now. Not that there's anything wrong with retail, but it's a far cry from the luxury lifestyle she thought she was going to fund with my alimony checks. She's splitting rent with Lorraine, driving the same car she complained wasn't good enough years ago, and living a life that's probably more modest than the one she had when we were married. The house she thought she'd won, gone. The alimony she practiced crying for, non-existent. The sympathy from friends who watched her social media meltdown, evaporated like morning dew under harsh sunlight. Her mother, from what I understand, isn't doing much bragging at Bridge Club these days. Apparently, Linda and Carol have some pointed opinions about people who raise their daughters to be gold diggers and schemers, and small-town gossip has a way of sticking to people like gum on a shoe. Lorraine went from being the proud mother of a woman, taking what she deserved, to being the cautionary tale about what happens when you encourage your kid to be morally bankrupt. Can't say I feel bad about that. Marcus Tanner, the lawyer with the expensive tie and the ego problem, apparently tried to sue me for withholding information or some nonsense legal argument that probably sounded good in his head, but fell apart the moment anyone with actual legal knowledge looked at it. The case got thrown out faster than Sabrina got evicted, and I heard he had to refund a portion of his fee to her because he based his entire strategy on assumptions instead of actual property research. He still calls me sir when we occasionally cross paths at legal proceedings or around town, though now it sounds less condescending and more like he's trying to maintain professional dignity after getting thoroughly embarrassed. As for me, I'm doing fine. Better than fine, actually. I'm thriving in that quiet, unassuming way that doesn't require social media posts or validation from people who don't matter. I kept the house, obviously, and I've slowly been renovating it back to something that reflects my taste instead of Sabrina's Instagram aesthetic. The white couch she bought got donated because I'm not trying to maintain furniture that looks dirty if you breathe near it. The gold cabinet hardware got replaced with something more practical. That ridiculous chandelier in the bedroom? Gone. Sold to someone on Facebook Marketplace who probably has the same questionable taste Sabrina did. I didn't gloat after everything was said and done. I didn't post my own social media victory lap or send Sabrina messages reminding her of what she lost. I didn't tell everyone in town my side of the story or try to further damage her already demolished reputation. I just moved on with my life, which turns out to be the most powerful statement you can make. Because when you actually win, when you come out of a terrible situation, not just intact, but better off, you don't need to convince anyone. Your life speaks for itself. I sat on my couch one evening, the same spot where I used to sit when Sabrina would scroll through her phone ignoring me, and I turned on the TV to watch a game. Just a regular Tuesday night. Nothing special, no drama, no scheming, no recording apps or legal strategies. Just me, my renovated house, and the peaceful silence that comes from not being married to someone who sees you as an ATM with disappointing withdrawal limits. And in that moment, I whispered to nobody in particular, "Soft men, huh?" Because that's the thing people like Sabrina and Lorraine never understand. They confuse kindness with weakness, patience with stupidity, quietness with inability. They see someone who doesn't make a scene or fight over every little thing, and they think that person can't fight at all. They mistake good manners for being a pushover and respect for being a doormat. But some of the most dangerous people you'll ever meet are the ones who smile while you think you're winning, the ones who stay calm while you lose your mind, the ones who let you think you're in control right up until the moment they reveal you never were. People think silence is weakness, that if you're not constantly asserting dominance or making noise or proving yourself, you must not have anything to prove. But silence isn't weakness. Silence is the sound of victory marinated in sarcasm and served ice cold. Silence is what happens when you've already won and don't need to convince anyone because the results speak louder than words ever could. Silence is me sitting in my house, drinking my coffee, living my life, while somewhere across town my ex-wife is explaining to her mother how she managed to turn a divorce settlement into an eviction notice. I didn't ruin Sabrina's life. Let's be clear about that. I didn't destroy her career, didn't sabotage her relationships, didn't do anything malicious or cruel. I just refused to be the victim she expected me to be. I just protected what was mine and let her face the consequences of her own actions. All I did was hand her a shovel when she said she wanted to dig for gold, and she enthusiastically dug herself into a hole so deep she needed a ladder to see rock bottom. She wanted luxury. She wanted a lifestyle that looked good on Instagram, a marriage that impressed her friends, a husband who made enough money to fund her fantasies without her having to contribute anything except judgment and disappointment. When I couldn't provide that, or more accurately, when I refused to go into debt pretending to be wealthier than I was, she decided to just take it by force through legal manipulation and practice tears. And I gave her a lesson instead. A lesson about reading documents carefully, about not underestimating people, about how karma works in real time when you're dealing with someone who's smarter than you gave them credit for. The best part? Her lawyer still calls me sir. Not in that condescending way he did during the signing, but with genuine respect tinged with what I can only assume is lingering embarrassment. Every time I see Marcus around town and he nods at me with that careful politeness, I'm reminded that sometimes the sweetest victories are the ones that keep reminding your opponents they lost. I think about starting that podcast sometimes, Soft Men Don't Play, where I could share stories about strategic thinking and standing up for yourself without being aggressive. But honestly, I don't need to. This whole experience taught me something valuable, that living well really is the best revenge, and that the people who need to learn lessons are usually too busy being bitter to listen to podcasts anyway. So here I am, sitting in my house that nobody can take from me, living a life that's peaceful and drama-free, occasionally thinking about that conversation in the kitchen that started this whole saga. He's too soft to fight, they said. And they were wrong. I wasn't too soft to fight. I was just smart enough to let them think they'd already won while I quietly prepared to dominate. Soft men don't play games we're not guaranteed to win. But when we do play, we play for keeps. And as I sit here in the silence of victory, surrounded by beige walls instead of pink ones, drinking tea that I bought with money that's still mine, I can't help but smile. Because Sabrina wanted a divorce, and she got one. She wanted freedom, and she got that too. She just didn't realize that freedom works both ways, and that the person she was freeing might have been waiting for permission to stop caring. The shovel was always in her hands. I just let her dig. I need the money tomorrow. My wife ordered me, handing me her parents' debt of $750,000. And no delays. She added. I smiled and said, okay. For hours later, I was at the airport. When she came to home for the money, she found only a closed door and a box, which she opened and started screaming. You know that moment when someone mistakes your wallet for a magic lamp? Like they genuinely believe if they rub it hard enough, a genie's gonna pop out and grant their wildest financial fantasies? Yeah, that was my Tuesday evening, except instead of a lamp, it was my entire existence, and instead of 3 wishes, it was one very expensive demand wrapped in designer perfume and audacity. I was sitting in my home office, minding my own business, trying to pretend that spreadsheets were interesting enough to justify staring at them for 6 hours straight, when I heard it. 3 loud knocks that hit my door like someone was announcing the apocalypse. Not the polite, hey honey, got a minute, kind of knock. No, this was the, I'm about to ruin your evening and possibly your entire financial future kind of knock. The kind that makes your coffee taste bitter before you even take the next sip. My wife, Bianca, stormed in with the energy of a Category 5 hurricane wearing Louboutins. Her heels were clicking against the hardwood floor like a countdown to trouble, each step a deliberate warning that whatever was about to come out of her mouth was going to cost me more than my sanity. She was waving a folder so thick it looked like it could choke a commercial-grade printer, and her face had that expression I'd come to recognize over the years, the one that said, I've already made a decision, and you're just here to fund it. I need the money tomorrow, she announced, not asked, announced, like she was reading a decree from some royal proclamament. $750,000. And no delays. She emphasized that last part like I was some kind of Amazon Prime package that better show up on time, or there'd be hell to pay in the form of 1-star reviews and angry phone calls to customer service. She didn't ask me if I had it. Didn't ask if it was convenient. Didn't even bother with the courtesy of explaining what apocalyptic scenario required $750,000 by tomorrow morning. She just commanded it into existence, as if my bank account was some kind of voice-activated ATM that responded to her tone of desperation mixed with entitlement. I sat there for a moment, letting the absurdity of it all sink in like a stone dropping into the ocean of my patience. Apparently, and I only knew this because she bothered to explain after I didn't immediately jump up and start printing money in the basement, her parents had decided to sink their entire life savings into a luxury furniture business that absolutely nobody asked for, wanted, or needed. We're talking about the kind of furniture that costs more than a car, but is somehow less comfortable than sitting on a pile of receipts from all your bad decisions. And now, surprise, surprise, they owed serious money to what Bianca delicately referred to as investors, which is rich people code for people who don't send friendly payment reminders. They send vans with guys named Rocco who have very persuasive methods of debt collection. I looked her straight in the eye, took a slow sip of my now-cold coffee that tasted like disappointment and broken dreams, and smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a reassuring smile. The kind of smile you give when you've just figured out the punchline to a joke that's been building for years. Okay, I said simply, letting that single word hang in the air like a piano suspended by dental floss. She blinked, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a genuine shock register on her face. She'd clearly prepared for an argument, maybe even a full-scale domestic dispute complete with raised voices and slammed doors. She'd probably rehearsed her counter-arguments in the car on the way home, mentally preparing for my resistance, my questions, my very reasonable concerns about producing $750,000 overnight like I was some kind of financial magician. Did you hear me? She asked, her voice carrying that edge of suspicion that comes when someone agrees too easily to something unreasonable. Loud and clear, I said, maintaining that same smile that probably looked more unsettling than reassuring. I'll handle it. And I meant every word, just not in the way she was expecting, not even remotely close to what her entitled little heart was hoping for. She stood there for another moment, folders still clutched in her manicured hands, probably trying to figure out if I'd finally snapped or if I'd secretly won the lottery and forgot to mention it. When I didn't elaborate, didn't ask for details, didn't do anything except turn back to my spreadsheet like we'd just discussed what to have for dinner, she eventually left, heels clicking away with slightly less confidence than when she'd arrived. For hours later, as the sun was setting and casting long shadows across our overpriced house filled with overpriced furniture that her parents probably consulted on, I was at the airport rolling my suitcase like a man who'd finally developed a severe and incurable allergy to stupidity. The terminal was buzzing with the usual chaos of travelers, but I felt oddly calm, like someone who'd just made the best decision of their life and was finally about to get some peace and quiet. The TSA agent looked at my ticket and then at me. "Business trip?" she asked casually, running my bag through the scanner. I smiled, that same smile I'd given Bianca earlier, the one that knew something nobody else did yet. "Something like that," I replied. "More like a permanent vacation from bad investments and worse in-laws." She looked confused but stamped my boarding pass anyway, probably used to travelers saying weird things at odd hours. As I walked toward my gate, rolling my suitcase behind me, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd finally dropped a weight I'd been carrying so long I forgot it wasn't supposed to be there. Tomorrow morning, Bianca was going to wake up expecting a miracle, expecting that magic lamp to produce her $750,000 wish. Instead, she was going to get something much better, much more educational, and infinitely more satisfying for me. She was going to get the truth, delivered in a cardboard box with a bow on top, because if she wanted everything by tomorrow with no delays, well, I was about to give her exactly that, just not the version she ordered. My flight was boarding, and as I handed over my ticket one last time, I couldn't help but chuckle. $750,000 by tomorrow morning, no delays. Sure thing, sweetheart. Your delivery is already being prepared, and trust me, it's going to arrive right on schedule. Let me explain Bianca's family before you start feeling bad for them, because I can already sense some of you out there getting all sympathetic, thinking maybe they're just down on their luck, maybe they hit a rough patch, maybe the economy screwed them over like it does to most honest, hardworking people. Let me stop you right there and save you the emotional energy, because these people aren't victims of circumstance. They're architects of their own financial disasters, and they've got the blueprints to prove it. Her dad, Martin, is the kind of guy who could sell ice to Eskimos if Eskimos were gullible enough to believe his pitch and didn't bother checking if the ice was actually frozen or just expensive water with confidence. This man once, and I'm not making this up because reality is somehow stranger than any fiction I could create, tried to sell air purifiers that didn't actually purify air. Let that sink in for a moment. Air purifiers that didn't purify anything. They just sat there looking expensive and modern, humming with the sound of broken dreams and false advertising, making the room smell like regret mixed with that fake, mountain breeze, scent that smells nothing like any mountain I've ever been near. He sold maybe 12 units before people figured out their allergies weren't getting better and their cats were still making them sneeze, and by the time the complaints rolled in, he'd already moved on to his next brilliant scheme, leaving behind a trail of unhappy customers and a Yelp page that read like a crime scene report. Her mom, Cynthia, treated credit cards like they were scratch tickets from the gas station, except with worse odds and higher interest rates. She had this philosophy, and I'm quoting directly here because I couldn't make this up if I tried, that money spent is money invested in happiness, which sounds almost profound until you realize she's saying this while buying her 4th designer handbag this month, none of which she actually needed or would use more than twice. She'd swipe that plastic like she was performing a magic trick, like the bill would somehow disappear into thin air or get paid by the tooth fairy or some other mythical creature that handles the debts of people who refuse to live within their means. Her wallet was like a graveyard of maxed-out Visas and MasterCards, each one a tiny tombstone marking another failed attempt at financial responsibility. And Bianca, oh sweet Bianca, she inherited their confidence, but not their caution, which is like inheriting a sports car, but not the ability to drive or the insurance to cover it when you inevitably crash it into a ditch. She had her mother's spending habits and her father's ability to ignore reality, A combination that should probably come with a warning label and possibly require a license to operate in public. She could drop $5,000 on a handbag without blinking, but would lecture me about leaving lights on in empty rooms like that was the real drain on our finances. She had this remarkable talent for spending money we had on things we didn't need, while simultaneously panicking about money we didn't have for things her family absolutely shouldn't have invested in. I'd already covered her parents' medical bills, and not the normal, oops, I broke my arm kind of medical bills, but we decided to get experimental cosmetic procedures in a country with questionable medical licensing kind of bills. I'd paid for 2 so-called emergency vacations, because apparently when you're drowning in debt, the only logical solution is to fly to Cancun and drown in margaritas instead, and somehow that's supposed to clear your head and help you make better financial decisions. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. And then there was the suspicious business expansion in Italy that Martin pitched as a crucial networking opportunity to expand the furniture business into European markets, which translated from bullshit to English means it was just a 3-month wine tour where he and Cynthia pretended to have meetings while actually just getting day drunk on Chianti and taking selfies in front of historical landmarks they couldn't name. The math was simple, painfully, brutally simple. The kind of equation that even a 5th grader could solve if that 5th grader had access to my bank statements and a basic understanding of cause and effect. Their debt equaled my exhaustion multiplied by infinity, with a side of resentment and a garnish of wondering what the hell I was thinking when I said, I do, without including a clause about financial boundaries and the definition of emergency. Every time I thought we'd hit rock bottom, they'd somehow find a basement beneath the basement, a sub-basement of bad decisions that required my wallet to bail them out of. The moment she dropped that $750,000 bomb on my desk like it was a casual request to pick up milk on the way home, I saw the pattern with crystal clarity, like someone had finally turned on the lights in a room I'd been stumbling around in for years. This wasn't new. This wasn't even surprising. This was just the latest, greatest, most expensive episode in a long-running series called How Much Can We Extract from This Guy Before He Finally Snaps? And I'd been the star of this show for way too long, playing the role of the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who always comes through, the human safety net who catches everyone else while slowly tearing under the weight of their combined stupidity. I was never the husband in this relationship, not really, not in the way that matters. I was the ATM with emotional support features, the kind of machine that dispenses cash when you punch in the right code, except the code was just showing up and demanding it with enough urgency and drama. I was the backup plan, the emergency contact, the guy whose name went on all the forms under financially responsible party, while they got to play fast and loose with reality and consequences. Her family had this remarkable ability to create crises out of thin air, like they were running some kind of disaster factory and business was booming. They'd make decisions that any reasonable person would recognize as catastrophically stupid, then act shocked, genuinely, authentically shocked, when those decisions resulted in catastrophically stupid outcomes. And every single time, without fail, they'd turn to me with those expectant looks, like I was supposed to pull a miracle out of my back pocket along with my checkbook. I'd spent years being the solution to problems I didn't create, funding lifestyles I didn't approve of, enabling behaviors that should have been stopped at the first red flag, which honestly appeared before I even proposed, but I was too young and stupid and optimistic to recognize it. I'd been the responsible adult in a family of perpetual teenagers who never learned that actions have consequences because I kept cushioning their falls, kept paying their bills, kept making their problems disappear with my credit rating and my savings account and my apparently infinite patience. But sitting there in my office, listening to Bianca demand $750,000 like she was ordering a pizza, something finally clicked into place. This wasn't going to stop. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't going to get better with time or communication or couples therapy. This was the rest of my life unless I did something about it. Unless I finally drew a line and meant it. By midnight, my plan was brewing in my head like the world's most satisfying cup of revenge coffee, the kind that keeps you awake not because of the caffeine, but because of the pure adrenaline rush of finally doing something about a problem that's been festering for years. I was sitting in my office with the lights dimmed, my laptop glowing in front of me like some kind of modern-day war room, and I felt more alive than I had in months, maybe years. This wasn't anger. This wasn't spite. This was clarity, the kind of crystal clear thinking that only comes when you've been pushed so far past your limit that you loop back around to being completely calm and methodical. I wasn't going to yell or argue or throw things or have one of those dramatic confrontations you see in movies where people scream and cry and break expensive dinnerware. No, that's amateur hour. That's what people do when they're operating on emotion instead of strategy. I was going to educate, and education, my friends, is so much more effective than anger because it lasts longer and cuts deeper. You can forget a fight. You can move past harsh words. But you can never unsee the truth when it's presented to you in printed form with highlighted sections and footnotes. Years of marriage had taught me one thing, one absolutely fundamental truth about human nature that I should probably have recognized earlier, but better late than never. Nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, terrifies freeloaders like accountability. These are people who've spent their entire lives operating in the shadows of vague promises and convenient memory loss, always moving forward without ever looking back at the wreckage they've left behind. They thrive in chaos because chaos is hard to document, hard to track, hard to prove. But accountability, documentation, evidence, that's kryptonite to people who've built their entire existence on the foundation of it'll work itself out, and don't worry about the details. So I started building my masterpiece. And I'm not being dramatic when I call it that, because this was going to be beautiful in the way that justice is beautiful, in the way that truth is beautiful when it's been hidden for too long. I grabbed a brown cardboard box from the garage, the kind that Amazon packages come in, completely unremarkable and innocent looking. If Bianca saw this box sitting by the door, she wouldn't think twice about it. She'd probably assume it was another delivery of something she ordered and forgot about, which happened approximately 3 times a week, because online shopping was her therapy and our bank account was the copay. Inside this humble cardboard box, I was going to place a collection of documents that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. I started with copies of every single transaction I'd ever made for her family. And when I say every transaction, I mean I went back to the beginning, to the very first time Martin called me saying he needed just a small loan to cover an unexpected expense. I had kept everything. Not because I was planning this specific moment, but because I'm the kind of person who keeps records, who saves receipts, who believes in documentation because memory is unreliable, but bank statements don't lie. I printed out screenshots of her mom's emergency spa receipts, and I put emergency in mental air quotes so large you could see them from space because there is nothing, and I repeat nothing, emergency about a hot stone massage and a seaweed wrap. An emergency is a heart attack. An emergency is your house burning down. An emergency is not deciding on a random Tuesday that your aura needs realigning and your chakras need balancing at a luxury spa that charges more per hour than most people make in a day. But Cynthia had called it an emergency, had used that exact word with tears in her voice, and I'd paid for it, because that's what I did back then. I paid for things and asked questions later, usually too much later to matter. I included her dad's fake business invoices, the ones he'd created for his various ventures that went nowhere, but somehow still required startup capital, operating expenses, and emergency funds. I had invoices for the air purifier business, for a brief stint trying to sell timeshares and properties he didn't own, for a pyramid scheme that he swore wasn't a pyramid scheme because it was shaped more like a diamond opportunity structure, and for at least 3 other enterprises that collapsed faster than a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Each invoice was a little monument to optimism without planning, confidence without competence, and my apparently limitless capacity to believe that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. And then, because I'm nothing if not thorough and maybe a little bit theatrical when the situation calls for it, I created a beautifully printed invoice of my own. I spent an embarrassing amount of time on the formatting, making sure it looked professional and official, using the same invoice template that Martin loved to use for his fake businesses. At the top, I put my name as the creditor and Bianca's entire family as the debtor. The whiskey burned going down, but in a good way, in a celebratory way, in a here's to finally growing a spine kind of way. Then I opened my laptop and started booking a one-way flight, because the thing about burning bridges is that you don't need a return ticket. At 3 a.m., I quietly rolled my suitcase through the hallway with the stealth of a man who'd finally figured out that sometimes the best argument is the one you don't have. The best explanation is no explanation at all, and the best goodbye is the one you don't say out loud. The wheels made this soft humming sound against the hardwood floor, and I found myself moving in slow motion. Not because I was having second thoughts, but because I wanted to savor every single second of this moment. This glorious moment of finally taking control of my own life instead of letting it be controlled by other people's disasters and demands. The house was dark except for the neon glow of our expensive refrigerator that had more IQ points than my in-laws, more smart features than my marriage had red flags, and probably a better understanding of boundaries than anyone in Bianca's family tree. That fridge cost $4,000 because apparently regular refrigerators that just keep food cold aren't good enough anymore. We needed one that could connect to Wi-Fi, send us notifications about expiring milk, and probably judge our late-night snacking habits. Bianca had insisted we needed it, had actually used the word need like it was a medical necessity, and I'd bought it because that's what I did back then. I bought things to keep the peace, to avoid arguments, to maintain the illusion that everything was fine when everything was actually a dumpster fire wrapped in designer labels. I left the box right at the entrance, positioned perfectly so it would be the first thing anyone saw when they walked in the door. I tied a little bow on top using some ribbon I found in the gift wrap drawer, because if you're going to deliver a box full of financial truth bombs and documented evidence of years of exploitation, you might as well make it pretty. The bow was red, cheerful, the kind of bow you'd see on a birthday present or a Christmas gift, which made it even more perfect because Bianca was definitely going to feel like she'd received a present, just not the kind she was expecting or wanted or could return to the store for store credit. My flight to Seattle was at 6 a.m., which meant I had about 3 hours to get to the airport, get through security, and position myself far enough away that when the inevitable explosion happened, I'd be safely out of the blast radius. I'd chosen Seattle deliberately, carefully, after spending approximately 45 minutes researching cities that were far away but not too far, different enough to feel like a fresh start, but not so different that I'd feel like I was on another planet. Seattle had rain, coffee, tech jobs, and most importantly, it had approximately 2,800 miles between me and Bianca's next meltdown. At check-in, the airline agent was way too chipper for this hour of the morning. One of those people who apparently wake up with sunshine shooting out of their various orifices and enthusiasm for life that seems almost offensive when you've been awake for 24 hours planning your escape from a toxic marriage. She looked at my ticket, then at me, probably noticing that I had the expression of someone who was either running away from something or running towards something, and in my case it was definitely both. Business or pleasure? She asked with that standard customer service smile that's been practiced in front of a mirror about 10,000 times. I smiled back, and I could feel it was one of those smiles that doesn't quite reach your eyes because your eyes are too busy calculating freedom and distance and the exact moment when your phone is going to start exploding with angry calls and text messages. Revenge therapy, I said, and I wasn't even joking. I was being completely honest because that's exactly what this was. Therapeutic revenge, the kind that's been prescribed by years of being underappreciated and financially drained. And the dosage was one cardboard box taken first thing in the morning on an empty stomach of expectations. She laughed like she thought I was joking, stamped my boarding pass, and told me to have a great flight. I wondered if she'd remember this interaction later, if she'd see the news stories or social media posts and think, oh damn, that was the revenge therapy guy. But probably not because airline agents see hundreds of passengers every day and most of us blur together into one giant mass of people trying to get from point A to point B without losing our minds or our luggage. As I sipped coffee in the lounge, the kind of mediocre airport coffee that costs $7 because they've got you trapped and you're desperate for caffeine, I imagined Bianca waking up in a few hours. I could picture it so clearly it was like watching a movie in my head, and it was going to be the best movie I'd never actually see in person. She'd wake up with her alarm, probably hit snooze twice because she always did, finally drag herself out of bed with that slightly annoyed expression she always had in the mornings before her coffee, and makeup transformed her into the polished version of herself that she presented to the world. She'd go through her usual routine, probably spending 45 minutes on skincare and hair, because heaven forbid she faced the day looking anything less than Instagram ready. And then she'd come downstairs full of confidence, expecting to see me sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop and a bank transfer confirmation ready to go. She'd probably already planned how she was going to call her parents with the good news, how she was going to be the hero who saved the day, how grateful they'd all be that she'd married someone with deep pockets and apparently no spine. Instead, she was going to see that box, that beautiful brown cardboard box with its cheerful red bow, and her smile was going to die instantly. She'd approach it confused at first, maybe thinking I'd gotten her a gift as some kind of weird apology for not being enthusiastic enough about bankrupting myself for her family's terrible business decisions. She'd tear into it with those perfectly manicured nails that cost more than most people's car payments, and then her entire world was going to tilt sideways. The smile would die. The confidence would evaporate. The realization would hit her like a freight train made of receipts and reality checks. She'd flip through page after page of documentation, seeing in black and white exactly how much money had flowed out of my accounts and into her family's endless pit of financial irresponsibility. She'd see her mother's spa days, her father's failed businesses, the vacations, the emergency loans that were never paid back, the casual requests that turned into thousands of dollars over the years. And then she'd find my invoice, that beautiful invoice with its itemized list and its grand total of $2.5 million, and she'd read the note, and that's when the screaming would start. I could already hear it in my imagination, that particular pitch that Bianca hit when she was really, truly upset. Not the fake upset she used to manipulate situations, but the genuine upset that came from being confronted with something she couldn't charm or cry or demand her way out of. It was going to hit such a high frequency that dogs 3 blocks away would start howling in sympathy, car alarms would go off, and even our smart refrigerator would probably register it as some kind of emergency alert. Oh, she was going to scream. She was going to scream so loud that the neighbors would consider calling the police, and then she'd probably call me, and then her parents, and then probably a lawyer, and then maybe her therapist if she had one, which she should have had years ago but refused to get because she didn't believe in therapy. She believed in shopping and complaining and making other people solve her problems. According to my smart doorbell footage, and let me just say that the $99 I spent on that Ring camera was the best investment I ever made because it's given me more entertainment value than Netflix, HBO, and Disney Plus combined. She arrived at exactly 9:10 a.m. looking like she'd just stepped out of a magazine spread about women who have their lives completely together. Her hair was perfect, not a strand out of place, styled in those effortless-looking waves that actually take 45 minutes and 3 different products to achieve. Her expression was smug, that particular brand of smugness that comes from believing you've won before the game even starts, the kind of confidence that's about to get shattered into approximately 8 million pieces. I was sitting in the Seattle airport by this point, my connecting flight delayed by 30 minutes, which was normally the kind of thing that would annoy me, but today felt like a gift from the universe because it meant I had extra time to watch this unfold in real time. I had my phone out, the Ring app open, volume turned up as high as it would go without disturbing the other passengers who were sitting around me looking equally annoyed about their delays. I probably looked insane, grinning at my phone like a maniac, but I didn't care because this was about to be better than any movie, any TV show, any form of entertainment that Hollywood had ever produced. "Babe?" she called out as she walked through the door, her voice echoing through the house with that casual expectation that I'd be there, ready and waiting with a solution to all her problems. She said it the way you'd call out for someone you expected to answer, not with any real concern or worry, just that automatic greeting that married people do when they come home. No answer came, obviously, because I was approximately 3,000 miles away sipping overpriced airport coffee and living my best life, but she didn't seem concerned yet. She probably figured I was in my office or in the shower or somewhere else in the house doing whatever it is she assumed I did when I wasn't actively solving her family's financial disasters. Then she saw the box, and I watched through the grainy doorbell camera footage as her entire demeanor changed. She stopped walking, tilted her head slightly like a confused puppy seeing its reflection for the first time, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head trying to figure out what this was. Her first instinct was probably to assume I'd ordered something, because in her world, boxes just appeared on doorsteps full of things people bought online without thinking twice about it. But then she noticed the bow, that cheerful red bow I'd tied on top, and her expression shifted from confused to cautiously optimistic. She squatted down in those expensive heels that probably cost more than my flight to Seattle, the kind of designer shoes that are beautiful, but completely impractical for anything resembling actual movement or comfort, and she tore at the tape with those perfectly manicured nails. The sound of the tape ripping was captured perfectly by the doorbell microphone, that satisfying screech of packing tape being pulled away, and I felt this little surge of anticipation knowing that in about 5 seconds, her entire morning was about to derail spectacularly. She unfolded the flaps, reaching inside with this expression that was half curious and half excited, probably still thinking this was some kind of surprise gift, maybe an apology present for not being more enthusiastic about bankrupting myself for her parents' furniture fiasco. Her hand pulled out the first document, and I watched as her eyes scanned the page, watched as her face went from excited to confused to slowly, gradually horrified. The smile died instantly, just completely evaporated from her face like someone had hit a kill switch on her happiness. It was beautiful in the way that karma is beautiful, in the way that natural consequences are satisfying when they finally catch up to people who've been running from them for years. Her mouth opened slightly, forming this little O shape that would have been comical if it wasn't so perfectly timed with my expectations of how this would go. What is this?" she mumbled, more to herself than to anyone else since she still didn't realize I wasn't home. Probably wouldn't be home ever again if I had anything to say about it. She was flipping through printed receipts of her family's shopping sprees, and I could see the moment each one registered in her brain. The spa receipts where her mom had declared an aura emergency. The business expenses for her dad's air purifier scam. The vacation costs for their Italian wine tour disguised as a business expansion. Every single page was another nail in the coffin of her assumption that I was just going to hand over $750,000 without question or consequence. Her dad's company name appeared on multiple documents, right next to his offshore gambling losses that he'd somehow neglected to mention when he was asking me for loans to save the business. I'd done my homework, had actually hired a private investigator for 2 weeks just to confirm my suspicions, and boy had that been money well spent because it turned out Martin wasn't just bad at business, he was actively terrible at hiding his terrible habits. The man had been gambling online at 2 a.m. on weeknights, betting on sports teams he'd never heard of in countries he couldn't locate on a map, losing thousands of dollars with the same confidence he used when pitching his ridiculous business ideas. Then she found the note, my beautiful, carefully crafted note that I'd spent probably too much time writing and rewriting until it had just the right amount of sarcasm mixed with finality. She read it out loud, her voice getting higher and more strained with each word. You wanted everything by tomorrow. Congratulations, you're right on schedule. The scream that came out of her mouth was something special, something I don't think I'd ever heard from her before in all our years of marriage. It wasn't the frustrated scream she'd use when traffic was bad or her favorite restaurant was booked. It wasn't the angry scream she'd deploy when I forgot to pick up her dry cleaning or double-booked over one of her brunch plans. This was a primal scream, the kind that comes from deep in your chest when you realize you've been completely and thoroughly outmaneuvered, when the reality you thought you were living in suddenly reveals itself to be completely different from actual reality. It hit such a pitch that I had to pull my phone slightly away from my ear, even though I was listening through the speaker. The other passengers in the airport waiting area definitely noticed at that point, because several people looked over at me, probably wondering what kind of horror movie I was watching that could produce that kind of sound effect. One older lady actually looked concerned, like she was considering asking if I was okay, but I just smiled and gave her a thumbs up because I was way better than okay. I was experiencing pure, unfiltered joy. Even Alexa apparently registered the scream because I could hear in the background, faintly through the doorbell mic, our Amazon Echo responding with its slightly confused robot voice. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you repeat your question? Which was probably the most accidentally hilarious thing Alexa had ever done, responding to a scream of existential horror like it was a misunderstood voice command for checking the weather or setting a timer. Bianca dropped the papers, and they scattered across our expensive marble entryway like the world's most expensive confetti, each page a little monument to years of taking advantage of someone's good nature and deep pockets. She put her hands on her head, fingers tangling in that perfectly styled hair that was about to get significantly less perfect, and just stood there for a moment looking like someone who'd just realized they'd bet everything on red and the ball had landed on black. By noon, I was sitting in a restaurant in downtown Seattle eating the fluffiest, most perfectly golden pancakes I'd ever had in my entire life, and I'm not exaggerating when I say they tasted like freedom with a side of maple syrup. The restaurant was one of those trendy brunch places where people line up around the block on weekends, the kind with exposed brick walls and Edison bulbs hanging from the ceiling and a menu that uses words like artisanal and locally sourced without a trace of irony. Normally, I'd roll my eyes at this kind of place, but today everything felt different, lighter, like someone had removed a 200-pound weight from my shoulders and replaced it with actual functional happiness. I had my phone propped up against the little metal napkin holder, watching Bianca's meltdown go viral in real time. And let me tell you, the internet works fast when there's drama involved. Apparently, in her panic and fury and complete inability to process what was happening, she decided that the best course of action was to record an angry Instagram video, because nothing says, "I'm handling this maturely," quite like putting your emotional breakdown on social media for the entire world to see. She positioned her phone at that slightly upward angle that everyone uses when they're trying to look their best, which is hilarious because no amount of strategic camera positioning can make you look good when you're mid-meltdown. The video was a masterpiece of unintentional comedy. She was tearful, mascara starting to run just slightly in the corners of her eyes, her voice doing that shaky thing that happens when you're trying to cry and talk at the same time. It was the full performance, the complete, "how could he do this to me?" routine that she'd probably practiced in her head without realizing how it would actually come across to people who didn't already have a vested interest in taking her side. She talked about betrayal and abandonment and how she couldn't believe someone could be so cruel, and conspicuously absent from this entire monologue was any mention of the $750,000 she'd demanded or the years of financial support I'd provided to her utterly hopeless family. The comments section wasn't kind, and I spent probably 40 minutes just scrolling through them with a grin on my face that probably made me look unhinged to the other brunch customers. The internet has this beautiful way of cutting through bullshit with surgical precision, and the people watching this video weren't buying what she was selling. "Sis, he didn't leave you. He escaped," read one comment with about 15,000 likes, and I wanted to find that person and send them a thank you card because they'd summed up my entire situation in 7 words. Plot twist. "He paid her back in trauma," was another gem, sitting at the top of the comments section with hearts and laughing emojis multiplying by the second. Someone else had written, "This is what happens when you marry for money and forget the prenup clause," which was fascinating because we actually did have a prenup that Bianca had insisted on back when she thought she was going to be the one with more money, back before her family's various business ventures collapsed like a series of increasingly expensive dominoes. That prenup was looking pretty good right about now, sitting in a lawyer's file somewhere protecting the assets I'd worked for from the family that treated my bank account like a community resource. People were doing deep dives in the comments, sharing their own stories of being financially drained by in-laws and irresponsible partners, creating this weird support group in Bianca's comment section that was definitely not the sympathy party she'd been hoping for. Someone had even created a hashtag Box of Truth, which was already trending in the local area and spreading outward like a financial justice wildfire. The hashtag was full of memes, people sharing their own experiences with entitled family members, and an uncomfortable amount of accurate speculation about what exactly had been in that box. Her family started panicking, and I knew this because my phone started blowing up with calls from numbers I'd blocked months ago, but had apparently found new phones or borrowed someone else's device to try to reach me. Her dad's phone line disconnected, which I discovered when I unblocked his number just for the entertainment value of seeing if he'd try to call. The number just went straight to that automated message that says the number you have dialed is no longer in service, which meant either he'd rage quit his phone carrier or, more likely, he hadn't paid his bill and they'd finally cut him off. Either way, it was poetic. Her mom posted a prayer emoji marathon on Facebook, which I saw because we were still technically friends on there even though I'd muted her posts years ago to preserve my sanity. It was just row after row of praying hands emojis, like if she posted enough of them, God would personally intervene and make this whole situation disappear. She'd written something vague about family going through trials and testing our faith, as if this was some kind of natural disaster that had randomly struck instead of the completely predictable consequence of years of financial irresponsibility and entitlement. The comments on her post were mostly from her church friends offering thoughts and prayers, which is nice and all, but notably doesn't come with a cash value that could help pay back the money they owed to actual dangerous people. Meanwhile, I was ordering extra syrup because nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, tastes sweeter than poetic justice served with a side of blueberry compote. The waitress brought over a whole little pitcher of warm maple syrup, and I drowned those pancakes like I was drowning my old life in delicious breakfast condiments. Each bite was better than the last, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't just because the restaurant knew how to cook pancakes. It was because I was eating them as a free man, as someone who'd finally stopped setting himself on fire to keep other people warm. I took a photo of my pancakes, perfectly plated with fresh berries and a light dusting of powdered sugar, the morning light streaming through the window hitting them at just the right angle. I posted it to my own Instagram, which I rarely used, but figured this occasion warranted breaking my social media silence, with the caption, "Sometimes the best decision you can make is the one that looks selfish to people who were taking advantage of you." Also, these pancakes are incredible. Within minutes, the post had more engagement than anything I'd ever shared, with people I hadn't talked to in years coming out of the woodwork to leave supportive comments and fire emojis. Someone commented, "Living well is the best revenge, but those pancakes are a close second," and I laughed out loud in the middle of the restaurant, causing a few people to look over. I didn't care. I was done caring about what people thought, done worrying about maintaining appearances, done playing the role of the responsible one who always came through. If people wanted to judge me for walking away from a toxic situation, they could judge all they wanted from the cheap seats while I sat here in Seattle eating pancakes that cost $17 and were worth every single penny. My phone buzzed with a notification that Bianca had posted a follow-up video, apparently doubling down on her victim narrative, but I didn't watch it. I'd seen enough, gotten enough satisfaction from the initial meltdown, and now it was time to actually move forward instead of dwelling on the past. 2 days later, my lawyer Thomas called, and I could hear the amusement in his voice before he even said hello, that particular tone lawyers get when they're about to deliver news that's professionally interesting and personally entertaining. Thomas had been my attorney for about 5 years, handling everything from my business contracts to the prenup that Bianca now probably regretted insisting on. And he was one of those guys who'd seen enough crazy situations that nothing really surprised him anymore. But this, apparently, was special enough to warrant a personal call instead of just an email update. "You sure you're not coming back?" he asked, and I could hear him shuffling papers in the background, probably my file, which had gotten significantly thicker over the past 48 hours. Thomas had that old-school lawyer vibe where he still preferred physical documents over digital files, kept everything in manila folders that he'd label in his barely legible handwriting, and I'd always found it charming in a weird way, like he was cosplaying as a lawyer from a 1970s legal drama. "Not unless it's for the movie rights," I said, and I wasn't entirely joking because at this point, the way things were unfolding, Hollywood was probably already optioning this story. I could see it now, some dramatic thriller about a man who escapes financial abuse with nothing but a cardboard box and a flight to Seattle, starring someone moderately famous who'd win awards for portraying my particular brand of exhausted sarcasm. They'd probably change the ending, make it more dramatic, add a car chase or something, because apparently real life isn't exciting enough even when it involves fleeing your marriage in the middle of the night with receipts as your only weapon. Thomas laughed, that deep chuckle that suggested he'd seen some things in the past 2 days that were going to make this conversation very interesting. "Well, you might want to sit down for this one," he said, which is never a good sign but also sometimes is a great sign depending on which side of the situation you're on. And in this case, I had a feeling I was on the entertaining side. Apparently, and this is where things got really interesting in that "I told you so" kind of way that's incredibly satisfying when you're proven right about people being terrible. Bianca's family business got audited. Not randomly audited, not routine audited, but specifically audited by people who had questions about where all the money was going and why the numbers didn't add up, and whether this was actually a legitimate business or just an elaborate front for siphoning money from investors who were now understandably upset about the whole situation. The IRS had gotten involved, which is never a good time for anyone, but especially not for people who've been playing fast and loose with the concept of business expenses versus personal spending. Apparently, Martin had been writing off everything as a business expense. The Italian wine tour, the luxury furniture in their personal home that was supposedly display inventory, Cynthia's spa treatments that were allegedly wellness expenses for maintaining a professional appearance, and even their country club membership that was theoretically for networking purposes, but was actually just so Martin could play golf and complain about his back nine performance. But here's where it got really good. The kind of good that makes you want to pump your fist in the air and yell justice, like you're in some kind of legal procedural TV show. Their so-called loans weren't actually loans at all. They were disguised luxury spending that they'd been trying to pass off as legitimate business debt. And guess whose name they'd tried to use as a guarantor without his knowledge or consent? That's right, yours truly. The guy who was currently sitting in a Seattle apartment eating takeout Thai food and living his best life approximately 3,000 miles away from this disaster. They'd forged my signature on documents, which is a special kind of stupid because we live in the digital age where handwriting analysis is a thing, and also I have copies of my actual signature on file with multiple banks and legal institutions. They'd put my name down as a co-signer for loans I'd never agreed to, used my credit score without permission to secure financing for their ridiculous furniture venture, and generally committed enough fraud to make a white-collar crime prosecutor salivate with excitement about their conviction rate statistics. But here's the beautiful part, the part that made me actually laugh out loud when Thomas told me. The part that proved that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor and timing. I'd already changed accounts, revoked all access, moved my assets into protected trusts, and basically disappeared from the financial grid as far as they were concerned. Every account they'd had access to was closed. Every credit card with my name attached was canceled. Every automatic payment that I'd been making for their various expenses was terminated. I'd spent the last 2 days systematically dismantling any financial connection I had to that family, and I'd done it with the kind of thorough precision that made Thomas actually say the words, "I'm impressed," which coming from a lawyer who'd been practicing for 30 years was basically the equivalent of a standing ovation. The prenup that Bianca had insisted on, the one she demanded back when we first got married because she was convinced her family's business ventures were going to make her independently wealthy and she wanted to protect her assets. That prenup was now protecting my assets instead. It clearly stated that any debts incurred by either party without the explicit written consent of the other party were that person's sole responsibility, which meant that all of Martin and Cynthia's business disasters, all of their fraudulent loans, all of their luxury spending disguised as business expenses, none of it could touch me. I was legally, completely, totally in the clear. Thomas chuckled again, and I could hear him taking a sip of what was probably his third coffee of the day because lawyers run on caffeine and billable hours. "You basically disappeared like Batman," he said, "but with receipts instead of a cape and a much better paper trail." I appreciated the superhero comparison, though I'd argue that Batman had it easier because he just had to fight criminals with elaborate themed gimmicks. He didn't have to deal with in-laws who thought a luxury furniture business for a market that didn't exist was a solid investment strategy. Meanwhile, Bianca was now trending online under the hashtag Box of Truth, which had taken on a life of its own in ways that I don't think anyone could have predicted. People were creating memes, writing think pieces about financial abuse in marriages, sharing their own stories of toxic family dynamics and the importance of boundaries. Someone had created a TikTok explaining the whole situation with receipts and documentation that they'd somehow pieced together from Bianca's public social media meltdown and public records, and it had millions of views. There were podcast episodes being recorded, relationship counselors using this as a case study, financial advisors warning people about the dangers of enabling family members' irresponsible spending habits. The story had taken on this weird viral life where it wasn't even really about me and Bianca anymore. It had become this larger conversation about accountability and boundaries and what happens when you finally stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. People were picking apart every aspect of the situation, analyzing Bianca's Instagram videos frame by frame, finding inconsistencies in her narrative, discovering public records that showed her parents' history of failed businesses and unpaid debts going back years before I ever entered the picture. Thomas sent me a few of the news articles that had picked up the story, because apparently local news had nothing better to do than report on viral relationship drama, and the headlines were spectacular. Man leaves marriage with box of receipts instead of alimony, read one. Husband's gift to wife exposes years of financial exploitation, read another. My personal favorite was the box that ended a marriage and started a movement, which felt a bit dramatic, but also kind of accurate given how many people were now talking about financial boundaries in relationships. 1 week later, my phone buzzed with that particular vibration pattern that means someone who's not in your contacts is trying to reach you. And in my experience, unknown numbers are either spam calls about my car's extended warranty or people I specifically don't want to talk to who figured out that I've blocked their regular number. I was sitting in my new favorite coffee shop in Seattle, one of those local places that takes their coffee so seriously they have a dedicated barista whose entire job is just steaming milk to the perfect microfoam consistency, when I saw unknown number flash across my screen. For a moment, I considered just letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. And also I'd had 2 excellent espressos already, so I was feeling confident and slightly wired in that way that makes you think you can handle anything the universe throws at you. I swiped to answer, bringing the phone to my ear with the kind of casual confidence that comes from knowing you hold all the cards and the person on the other end is probably holding a losing hand and a whole lot of regret. Hello, I said, keeping my tone neutral and pleasant, like I was answering a call from someone trying to schedule a dentist appointment rather than from someone who'd spent the last week having a very public meltdown across multiple social media platforms. It was Bianca, and I knew it was her before she even spoke because I could hear her breathing, that particular rhythm of someone trying to compose themselves before launching into a conversation they've probably rehearsed in their head about 50 times. Her tone was the emotional equivalent of burnt toast, that specific quality of something that started out with potential but has been left unattended for too long and is now just bitter and charred and frankly inedible. It was the voice of someone who'd been crying, then angry crying, then rage posting on social media, then crying again, and was now trying to pull together some shred of dignity for this conversation. "You humiliated me," she snapped, and there it was, jumping straight past hello, straight past any attempt at civility or pleasantries, right into the accusation like we were picking up a fight that had been paused rather than starting a new conversation. Her voice had that edge of self-righteous fury that suggested she genuinely believed she was the victim in this situation, that somehow my decision to document years of financial exploitation and leave instead of bankrupting myself for her parents' terrible business decisions was the real crime here. "Technically," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee for dramatic effect even though she couldn't see me, "you humiliated yourself. I just provided supporting documents." I kept my voice calm, almost cheerful, because nothing irritates angry people more than someone who refuses to match their energy, who stays collected while they're losing it. It's like trying to start a fire with wet wood. No matter how much heat you apply, it's just not going to catch. "You think this is funny?" she demanded, her voice going up an octave in that way it did when she was really working herself up, when she was transitioning from regular angry to the kind of angry where she'd start saying things she'd later claim she didn't mean, but absolutely did mean in the moment. I could picture her pacing, probably in her parents' house since I doubted she was still living in our place, wearing a path in whatever expensive carpet they'd bought with money they didn't have. "Not funny," I said, and I paused for effect, letting the silence hang there for just a beat longer than comfortable. "Hilarious." And I meant it too, because at this point, after everything that had happened, after watching her viral meltdown and the subsequent discovery of her family's fraud and the beautiful karmic justice of it all, it had transcended regular funny and entered the territory of cosmically hilarious. It was the kind of situation that you'd read about and think, there's no way that's real, except it was real, and I was living it. And it was absolutely, undeniably hilarious. There was silence on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that's louder than words because you can feel the fury radiating through the phone. I imagined her standing there, phone gripped so tight her knuckles were probably white, trying to formulate a response that would make me feel guilty or ashamed or whatever emotion she was hoping to extract from this conversation. But I was 3,000 miles away, sitting in the sunshine with excellent coffee, and I'd spent the last week sleeping better than I had in years, so guilt wasn't really on the menu. Then I heard it, the sniffles, the slight catch in her breathing that meant tears were either actively happening or about to happen. And this was the part where she'd try to pivot from anger to sadness, from attacking to playing the victim, because that's what people do when their first emotional strategy isn't working. "We lost everything," she said, her voice smaller now, trying to sound broken and vulnerable in a way that would have worked on me a year ago, maybe even a month ago, but definitely wasn't working on me now. I sighed, not because I felt bad, but because this was so predictable it was almost boring. "Bianca, we didn't lose everything," I said, emphasizing the we to make it clear that there was no we anymore. That ship had sailed, and I was the one who'd bought the ticket and burned the dock behind me. "You still have your parents' vintage Ego collection, which, based on current market value and the fact that it's apparently indestructible despite all evidence to the contrary, should be worth at least several $1,000,000 in sheer audacity alone." I could hear her sharp intake of breath, that little gasp that meant I'd hit a nerve, struck right at the heart of what was actually bothering her. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the fact that I'd stopped playing my assigned role, stopped being the safety net, stopped enabling the whole dysfunctional family circus that had been running for years with me as the primary sponsor and apparently the only person who thought it was insane. "How can you be so cruel?" she asked, and her voice was genuinely confused now, like she actually couldn't understand how I could be making jokes when her world was falling apart. She really, truly believed that I was the villain in this story, that my crime of stopping the money train was worse than years of taking advantage of my good nature and deep pockets. It was fascinating in a clinical sort of way, this complete inability to see her own role and how we'd ended up here. "Cruel would have been staying," I said, and my voice was serious now, not joking anymore, because this needed to be said clearly. "Cruel would have been continuing to enable your family's financial disasters and pretending like it was normal or sustainable or my responsibility to fix. Cruel would have been teaching you that this behavior is acceptable and that there are no consequences for treating people like ATMs with feelings. What I did was set a boundary, probably should have done it years ago, but better late than never, right?" She didn't have a response to that, or if she did, she didn't want to say it, because the silence stretched out between us like a chasm that no amount of words was going to bridge. I could hear her breathing, uneven and shaky, and I knew she was crying now. Real tears, not strategic tears, and part of me, a very small part that still remembered the person I'd married before everything went sideways, felt a tiny flicker of something that might have been sympathy if sympathy wasn't exhausted from years of being the only emotion I was allowed to have in this relationship. "This isn't over," she finally said, and her voice had that edge of determination that suggested she was already planning her next move, already thinking about lawyers and arguments and ways to spin this situation back in her favor. "Actually," I said calmly, "it is. It's been over for a while. We were just the last ones to figure it out." "Well, I figured it out. You're still working on it apparently." She hung up without saying goodbye, and honestly, I wasn't surprised because Bianca had never been good at endings, had always preferred to just leave things unfinished and dangling rather than actually closing chapters properly. I looked at my phone screen for a moment, watched it fade to black, and then I did something I probably should have done years ago. I blocked the number, added it to my ever-growing list of blocked contacts that included her parents, her siblings, and various family friends who tried to reach out on her behalf with messages about working things out and family values. I turned off my phone completely, not just silent, but actually powered down, because I was done with this conversation, done with this chapter, done with being available for people who only called when they needed something. The barista caught my eye and asked if I wanted a refill, and I said yes because I had nowhere to be and nothing to do except sit here in the sunshine and enjoy the sound of silence that comes from finally putting your own needs first. Seattle became my new home, and not just in the logistical sense of this is where my mail gets delivered now, but in that deeper way where a place actually feels like it fits you instead of you constantly trying to contort yourself to fit into it. I rented a small apartment with a view of the bay, nothing fancy or Instagram-worthy, just a simple one-bedroom with hardwood floors that creaked in a charming way and windows that actually opened, which felt revolutionary after living in a house where everything was automated and climate-controlled and basically designed to make you forget that weather existed outside your perfectly temperature-regulated bubble. The apartment was in one of those older buildings that had character, which is real estate code for things don't always work perfectly, but it has charm, and I loved every imperfect inch of it. The refrigerator made a humming sound that was slightly louder than it should be. The bathroom tiles were original to the building, probably from the 1960s, in this mint green color that should have been hideous but somehow worked. The neighbors were a mix of young professionals and older folks who'd lived there for decades, and nobody cared about impressing anyone. Nobody was competing over who had the better car or the more expensive watch or whose vacation photos got more likes on social media. I started a consulting gig, something I'd been thinking about doing for years, but never had the mental energy to actually pursue because all my energy was being drained by managing other people's crises and disasters. Turns out when you're not spending 40 hours a week being someone's emotional support ATM, you actually have time and brain space to focus on your own career and interests and goals. The consulting work was in my field, helping small businesses with their financial planning and strategy, which felt deliciously ironic given that I'd just escaped from a family that thought financial planning meant hoping really hard that money would materialize when you needed it. My clients were people who actually wanted help, who took my advice seriously, who implemented the strategies I suggested, and then came back with results and gratitude instead of new problems and demands. It was shocking how much I enjoyed working with people who valued my expertise instead of just viewing me as a resource to be extracted. I set my own hours, worked from coffee shops in my apartment, and sometimes from the park when the weather was nice, and I made enough money to live comfortably without the constant anxiety of wondering when the next financial emergency would hit. I rediscovered peace, which sounds dramatic, but I'm being completely serious when I say I'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist without waiting for the other shoe to drop. Peace, it turns out, is waking up on a Saturday morning without immediately checking your phone to see if someone's texted you about an emergency that requires your immediate financial intervention. Peace is eating dinner without mentally calculating how much this meal costs compared to how much you've already spent this month on other people's problems. Peace is going to bed at night without that knot in your stomach that comes from knowing you're living a life that doesn't actually align with your values or desires. I learned that silence is powerful, more powerful than any argument or explanation or attempt to make someone understand your perspective when they're fundamentally incapable of seeing past their own needs. You can't argue with someone who's already gone, and there's something beautifully final about that. Something clean and decisive that doesn't leave room for the endless back-and-forth negotiations that never actually resolve anything. Silence says, I'm done engaging with this dynamic, in a way that words never quite can, because words invite response and debate and the possibility of being worn down over time. Friends asked if I'd ever forgive Bianca, and I appreciated that they asked instead of just assuming I should or lecturing me about the importance of forgiveness like it's some kind of moral obligation regardless of circumstances. These were my real friends, the ones who'd watched me slowly disappear into my marriage over the years, who'd bitten their tongues and tried to be supportive while clearly seeing that something was deeply wrong with the whole situation. Now they were asking if I'd forgive her, and I could tell they were genuinely curious about my answer, not judging, just wondering. Sure, I said, leaning back in my chair at the bar where we'd met up for drinks, surrounded by people who actually cared about me as a person rather than as a financial solution. As soon as my laughter stops echoing in her mansion of regrets, I'll consider forgiveness. So probably never, but never say never. They laughed because they knew I was half joking and half serious. That particular combination of humor and genuine feeling that real friendship allows you to express without judgment. The truth was, forgiveness felt like the wrong word for what I was experiencing. I wasn't angry anymore, wasn't dwelling on what had happened or plotting revenge beyond the extremely satisfying box of receipts that had already been delivered. I was just done, completely and totally finished with that chapter of my life. And moving forward without looking back didn't require forgiveness. It just required commitment to my own well-being and boundaries. Forgiveness implies that someone did something wrong and you're choosing to let it go. But what I was doing was recognizing that I'd participated in an unhealthy dynamic for too long, and I was choosing something different now. She sent one last message weeks later, and I only saw it because I'd unblocked her number briefly to check if she was still trying to contact me. Morbid curiosity getting the better of me one evening when I'd had a glass of wine and was feeling reflective. The message was short, accusatory, and completely lacking in any self-awareness. You ruined my family. I stared at it for a moment, sitting on my couch with my laptop balanced on my knees. The glow of the screen the only light in the room as evening settled over Seattle outside my windows. I could have ignored it, could have blocked the number again and never responded, but something about the sheer audacity of that statement demanded a response, required one final clarification before I closed this door permanently. I replied, and my response was even shorter than her message, just 11 words that contained more truth than all the conversations we'd had over the years combined. No, I just stopped sponsoring it. There's a difference. I hit send, then immediately blocked the number again, this time with the kind of finality that comes from knowing you've said everything that needs to be said, and anything more would just be repetition. Her family wasn't ruined because of me. Her family was ruined because they'd built their entire existence on a foundation of other people's money and questionable decisions, and eventually that foundation crumbled the way unsustainable things always do. I just happened to be the support beam that finally said enough and stepped away. And yes, that meant the structure collapsed, but that's not the support beam's fault. That's the architect's fault for designing something that couldn't stand on its own. I started going to therapy, which was something I'd considered before, but never prioritized because I was always too busy dealing with everyone else's problems to address my own. My therapist was this middle-aged woman named Dr. Patterson who had an office that smelled like lavender and always had a box of tissues within arm's reach. And she had this way of asking questions that made you realize things about yourself that you'd been avoiding for years. We talked about boundaries and codependency and the difference between being helpful and being enabling. And slowly I started to understand how I'd ended up in that situation in the first place. Turns out, I had this thing where I equated my value with my usefulness, where I believed that being loved meant being needed, and Bianca's family had recognized that vulnerability and exploited it, probably not consciously or maliciously, but exploited it nonetheless. Dr. Patterson helped me see that real love doesn't demand constant sacrifice, that healthy relationships involve reciprocity and respect, and the understanding that everyone's needs matter, not just the loudest or most persistent person's needs. It was revolutionary, honestly, this idea that I could say no to things without being a bad person, that I could prioritize my own well-being without being selfish. 3 months later, I stood at the same airport where it all began, except this time I was flying for pleasure instead of escape, and let me tell you, there's a world of difference between those two experiences. I was heading to Portland for a weekend hiking trip with some new friends I'd made through a meetup group, the kind of spontaneous plan that happens when you're not constantly budgeting for other people's emergencies and can actually afford to live your own life. Bianca's parents declared bankruptcy, which I learned through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances who still felt the need to keep me updated even though I'd made it clear I didn't care. Apparently, the luxury furniture business collapsed spectacularly, taking with it their savings, their credit, and whatever dignity they'd managed to maintain through years of terrible decisions. The investors they owed money to were not amused, and last I heard, Martin was working at a big-box hardware store explaining the difference between wood stains to customers who definitely didn't need his level of unwanted expertise. Bianca reportedly moved in with her aunt and started selling motivational mugs online, those generic inspirational quote mugs that say things like "family first" and "blood is thicker than water," which was so ironic it almost felt like performance art. I almost bought one just for the sheer entertainment value of drinking my morning coffee from a mug that said "family first" while sitting in my peaceful Seattle apartment, completely free from family drama. Almost, but not quite, because that would have required me to visit her online store, and I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of even a single-page view. Sometimes I rewatch the doorbell footage from that morning, not out of spite or bitterness, but as a reminder that freedom has a soundtrack, and in my case, it was her scream echoing across the porch when she opened that box. It was my screensaver for a while, just the frozen frame of her face mid-realization, which probably made me seem petty to anyone who saw my phone, but I didn't care because it reminded me of the exact moment I took my life back. Now, when people asked about my marriage at parties or networking events, I smiled and delivered my standard line with perfect comedic timing. It ended with a box. And that's the first time she ever opened something I gave her willingly. The joke always landed, people always laughed, and sometimes someone would recognize the story from social media, and we'd have a whole conversation about boundaries and financial abuse and the importance of knowing when to walk away. Then I'd raise my coffee, or my beer, or whatever I was drinking at the moment, and toast quietly to myself, to peace, to humor, to walking away without paying a dime more than I already had, to freedom, to boundaries, to the revolutionary act of choosing yourself when everyone else expects you to choose them, to cardboard boxes and receipts, and the beautiful finality of closing a door that should have been closed years ago. The plane was boarding, and as I walked down the jetway toward my weekend of hiking and laughter and living a life I actually enjoyed, I felt lighter than air, like I'd finally figured out the secret that took too long to learn. Sometimes the best investment you can make is in your own peace of mind. And sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is absolutely nothing at all for people who never appreciated you in the first place.